I've always said the mountains can hear you, not in some poetic, metaphorical way. I mean, it literally feels like they listen, like every word you speak is swallowed by the snow and echoed back in ways you can't quite trust. That's what it felt like the night we drove up near McCall, Idaho, into the frozen pass locals call Frost Camp. My name's Daniel, 42 years old, an electrician out of Boise. I'd been on plenty of RV trips before, most of them harmless, lakeside campsites with too many mosquitoes, that quiet forest clearings, where the only thing keeping me awake was my own restlessness. But this trip was different. It was meant to be a reset, a chance for me and my cousin Mark, 36, a mechanic with too much on his mind, to shake off the heaviness of the last year. Mark had just gone through a brutal divorce. I was staring down another winter alone after my kids had moved out. We thought a trip into the high country, just the two of us, would give us that clarity. Maybe even that strange kind of healing that only comes when you're cut off from everything else. We picked McCall because of its silence. That's the word people always use. Silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, pressing, alive. Locals mentioned Frost Camp almost like a warning. That place freezes earlier than anywhere else, one old man at a gas station told us. The ground goes hard, the trees close in, and if you're not careful, you'll hear things out there you don't want to hear. Mark laughed it off, said old-timers love to spook outsiders. But even he went quiet as the road narrowed into a one-lane stretch, winding through ice-coated pines. Snow flurries drifted down in the headlights, swirling like ashes. The RV heater hummed, and I kept both hands tight on the wheel because the road felt less like asphalt and more like something that had been carved out of a glacier. By the time we pulled into the clearing, Frost Camp, it was near dark. The sun had burned itself out behind jagged peaks, leaving the valley in shadow. The place was almost bare, 2 old fire rings blackened with soot, the remnants of wooden posts leaning like gravestones, and the hush of trees pressing from every side. No campers, no tents, no tire tracks in the thin crust of snow. Just us. "You sure this is it?" Mark asked, peering out at the clearing. "GPS says so," I muttered, though the signal had been flickering all through the drive. My gut told me something else, that this was the kind of place where GPS stopped mattering, where the land decided whether you were in the right place or not. We parked, leveled the rig, and stepped outside into the brittle air. Every sound carried, the crunch of boots in snow, the metallic click of the RV door, even the way we breathed, like the cold made every exhale louder than it should have been. The forest stood there, ancient and unmoving, and I felt that weight again, that sense of being overheard. We tried to lighten the mood. Mark cracked open 2 beers, tossed me one, and we stood by the half-buried fire ring. "You ever notice," he said, "how places like this don't feel abandoned? They feel like they're waiting?" "Waiting for what?" I asked. He shrugged, but he didn't answer. That first night, the cold crept in fast. We had the furnace running inside the RV, the hat blankets piled high, but I woke sometime after midnight to a sound. At first, I thought it was the wind moving through the trees, that high whistling pitch you get in winter forests. But it wasn't steady. It was measured, a tapping. 3 knocks. Pause. Then 2. I sat up, heart pounding. Mark was out cold, his snoring muffled under blankets. I waited, straining my ears. The knocks came in faint, deliberate, on the outer wall of the RV. I whispered, "Hello?" and immediately hated myself for it. The word hung there, swallowed, echoed back in the silence. No answer, just the creak of snow shifting against metal. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. In the morning, I told Mark what I'd heard. He grinned, half amused, half dismissive. "Dude, your wound too tight. It's ice. The rig's contracting. Science." But when he stepped out to check the propane tank, he froze. Dan?" I came out, squinting against the white glare. He was pointing at the snow along the RV wall. Not animal tracks, not boots, just 5 small indentations in the crust, like someone had pressed their hand flat against the snow with fingers spread wide. We didn't say much after that. Made coffee, ate in silence, both pretending it wasn't strange. both pretending we didn't notice how the forest seemed quieter than yesterday, how even the birds hadn't stirred. By midday, clouds rolled in, thick and low, swallowing the ridges. The light dimmed, and the air took on that heavy, charged feeling right before a storm. Mark suggested we cut the trip short, but I shook my head. One weird night doesn't mean we bail. I think I said it more for myself than him. I didn't want to admit that deep down, I already felt something was off. I'd been on dozens of trips, camped in storms, dealt with coyotes pawing at the edge of camp, but this was different. The unease wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside me, a tension building like a wire pulled too tight. That evening, the storm came down hard. Snow hammered the roof, branches cracked in the woods, and the temperature dropped so fast our windows frosted over within minutes. We huddled inside, the RV rocking in gusts. At one point, the power cut out, the furnace sputtered and died, and all we had was the sound of the storm pressing against thin metal walls. That's when I heard it again. The knocking. Not random this time, steady, a rhythm. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, over and over beneath the howl of wind. Mark heard it too. He sat up, his face pale in the lantern light. Tell me that's ice. I shook my head. Because ice doesn't knock in patterns. Ice doesn't wait for silence between gusts. Ice doesn't sound like someone trying to be let in. We sat there, every muscle tight, listening. Then as suddenly as it began, it stopped. No more knocking. Just the storm. Hours passed before sleep found us, if you can call it sleep. It was more like a restless drift, each creak of the RV jerking me awake. And then morning came, gray and heavy, the snow piled high against the rig. When I stepped outside, the first thing I saw stopped me cold. Around the clearing, circling the RV in a perfect wide ring were footprints. Human. Barefoot. Each print pressed deep into the snow, toes spread as if whoever it was had walked in the freezing dark with no shoes, no socks, no sense of pain. They circled once, twice, 3 times, then vanished into the tree line. Mark came out behind me, his breath catching. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. The forest wasn't silent anymore. It was listening. We didn't move at first. I just stood there, boots buried in the snow, staring at the footprints. The air was so cold it hurt my lungs to inhale, each breath like shards of glass sliding down my throat. Mark came up beside me, his shoulders tight, eyes darting to the tree line. "We need to leave," he said, voice low but not panicked. "Not yet." That would come. I shook my head. "We can't. The road's iced over. The storm's worse than last night." My own words sounded hollow. I didn't believe them. But there was a stubbornness in me, a need to see this through, to figure out what the hell was happening before we ran screaming into the forest. We went back inside, locking the RV doors, bolting the little latch that had seemed laughable the day before. I kept the lantern lit, casting long shadows that stretched across the walls like claws. Mark pulled the blankets around his shoulders, trying to stay warm, but his hands were shaking. Not from cold, I could tell. From the same quiet panic that had gripped me the night before. Hours passed. The storm didn't let up. It had turned the clearing into a world of gray and white, everything blending together, the trees rising like ghosts in the distance. Then, faint at first, I heard it again. That tapping. Not from outside this time. From the ceiling. Above us. I froze. Mark froze. It started slow. 1 tap, then 2, then a pause, and the rhythm, 3, pause, 2, like the night before. But this time, the sound moved. Across the ceiling, shifting, light but deliberate, as if someone or something was pacing above the RV. "Okay," Mark said finally, voice tight. "We're not alone." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind refused to accept it. "It's probably the wind," I said, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Wind doesn't tap with purpose. Wind doesn't play games. Wind doesn't wait until the moment you start doubting yourself. We stayed inside the RV all day, watching the storm through frost-lined windows, listening to every snap of a branch, every whisper of wind. I kept thinking about those footprints circling us. They hadn't seemed random, hadn't been fleeing or hunting. They were deliberate, methodical, as if whoever or whatever was out there had been studying us, marking us, testing the boundaries of our little fortress. By nightfall, the storm had worsened. Snow was piling against the RV, drifts forming like walls. The heater had died again. We huddled together under layers of blankets, trying to sleep, but the tapping started again, this time all around. From the ceiling, the walls, even the floorboards beneath us. Mark's whispered voice cut through the dark. "Do you hear it? It's everywhere." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. I heard it. I felt it. The cold had a new edge now, sharper, more personal. It was as if the storm itself was a warning, a message wrapped in snow and wind. And whatever was out there wasn't waiting for us anymore. It was circling, observing, preparing. At some point during the night, I fell into a restless half-sleep. That's when I saw them. I dreamt I was outside, walking through the snow in the gray twilight of the storm. The footprints were there, circling the RV, but they weren't just prints anymore. Figures moved within them, tall, thin, featureless, wrapped in the mist of the snow. They didn't walk. They glided, drifting over the snow, leaving the prints as they moved. And then they stopped. And I could feel their attention on me, heavy and accusing. I woke with a start to the sound of glass cracking, not from the windows, not from the RV's walls, but from the lantern I'd left on the table. Its glass was spiderwebbed with cracks, tiny shards scattered across the floor. Mark was screaming. Something was outside, pressing against the RV, moving along the sides, testing the limits of the thin metal walls that separated us from the freezing dark. I grabbed the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the snow. Nothing. Only the drifting flakes. Only the gray shapes of trees. Only the storm, endless and oppressive. But then, movement. Far back at the tree line. Something small. Then another. Another. Barely visible through the snowfall, have figures emerging, gliding along the edge of the clearing, always at the border of our vision. I swear to God, they were watching us, counting us, waiting for the moment we made a mistake. Mark was shaking uncontrollably now. "We need to leave. Now." I nodded, but leaving meant stepping into the storm, into the snow, into whatever was waiting. And I realized then, in that long, frozen moment, that Frost Camp wasn't a place you left easily. It was a trap. A test. A lesson wrapped in ice and wind, and we'd stumbled into it blind. I had tried the door handle, locked, pulled harder, still locked. The latch was holding. The RV was our only barrier. I grabbed my pocket knife, holding it tight, praying we'd need it only for protection against the cold. Against anything else, I wasn't so sure anymore. Hours, or maybe minutes, time blurred in that storm, passed. The tapping slowed. Or maybe we just stopped hearing it, ears too strained, hearts too loud. But when the faint light of early morning filtered through the frost, I dared to look outside. The footprints were gone. The snow was pristine. Nothing but the storm's aftermath. The RV sat in the middle of the clearing, unbroken. I exhaled. Relief, maybe, or denial. Mark and I collapsed against the seats, silent, exhausted, and waiting for the storm to break. When the sun finally emerged, gray and diffused through clouds, I stepped outside again. The air smelled clean, fresh, like nothing had happened. The forest looked calm, the clearing looked innocent, and yet I knew better. Frost Camp had marked us, and if we thought it was over, we were wrong. I didn't know it yet, but the worst was coming. We spent the day in a tense silence, packing only what we thought we might need to escape if the storm shifted. The snow had piled high along the edges of the clearing, drifts forming unnatural walls that made Frost Camp feel smaller, more suffocating. I kept glancing at the tree line, expecting movement, expecting to see those figures gliding along the border, but there was nothing. And yet, I knew they were there, waiting, watching. By evening, the storm had lessened, but the temperature dropped even further, the air turning brittle and sharp. I watched my breath curl into the cold like smoke. The forest seemed quieter than before, too quiet, no wind, no birds, just that oppressive, waiting silence that pressed in on every side. Mark tried to break it. He lit the little camping stove, making coffee and muttering about breakfast. I smiled faintly, grateful for the small rituals that reminded us we were human, that we had something familiar to hold on to. But the feeling wouldn't leave. Frost Camp had changed overnight. It had shifted. The snow, the wind, the silence. It wasn't just background anymore. It was a living thing, shaping our fear, dictating our movements. I tried to joke, tried to dismiss it. Maybe it's just wildlife, I said. But even as I spoke, my gut twisted. Wildlife doesn't leave barefoot footprints circling your RV 3 times in perfect symmetry. Wildlife doesn't knock on doors in a rhythm, then vanish when you summon the courage to answer. Night fell faster than I expected. The shadows crept in across the clearing, long fingers stretching toward the RV. I could see them moving just beyond the tree line, shapes shifting with the drifting snow, never close enough to make out details, never far enough to let me believe we were safe. We tried to sleep. I mean, really tried. But the tapping returned almost immediately. This time it was louder, more insistent, not just on the RV walls, everywhere, the ceiling, the floor, the walls. It had a pattern now, deliberate, almost like it was spelling something we couldn't understand. My chest tightened, a cold panic rising in my throat. Mark whispered, I can't do this. I put a hand on his shoulder, but even I felt the tremor running through me. We just have to wait it out, I said. The words tasted like lies. I didn't believe them. But what else could I say? We couldn't leave. Not yet. Not until we understood. Until we faced it. Hours passed in a haze of fear and half sleep. Then the sound changed, from tapping to dragging, slow, deliberate, scraping against the metal of the RV. Something was moving around us. Close now. Too close. My heart was hammering. I wanted to run, to scream, but every muscle froze. Then came the voice. Not human. Not exactly. It was a whisper, carried through the walls, through the snow, something that spoke directly to the corners of your mind. Go, oh, it said. Go. I yanked at the door, but it wouldn't budge. Mark was clutching the seat, shaking, eyes wide in the dim lantern light. The whispering grew louder, circling us, coming from every direction at once. And then I realized the worst truth. Frost Camp wasn't just outside. It had invaded us. The RV wasn't safe. The clearing wasn't safe. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it toward the tree line. The snow moved, not in wind, not in storm, but in figures. They glided closer, pale shapes against the dark pines, featureless but full of intent. I could see their hands, fingers spread wide like the prints pressed into the snow the first night. Mark screamed and grabbed my arm. We have to leave. Now! I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But opening the door meant stepping into them, into Frost Camp itself. The wind howled around the RV like a living thing, the snow lashing at the windows. I felt trapped in a tomb of ice and metal, every breath a struggle against panic. Then silence. I froze. The figures had stopped. The whispering vanished. Only the storm remained, soft now, almost polite. I glanced at Mark. He was pale, trembling, but alive, for now. I knew we couldn't stay. We couldn't wait for another night. Frost Camp didn't give warnings twice. We had to leave. I checked the RV supplies, grabbed our coats, and slid the side door open just enough to squeeze through. The cold hit me like a wall, my lungs burning as snowflakes stung my face. We ran toward the road, boots cutting through deep snow. Every shadow seemed alive, every tree line a living threat. I could feel them watching, circling us even as we ran. And then I heard it, a low, guttural sound, like the scraping of fingernails against ice coming from somewhere behind us. I didn't look back. The path to the highway was treacherous. Ice covered the gravel, snow hid hidden dips. We stumbled, falling, getting up, moving faster than our muscles could handle. Every step felt like we were sinking deeper into the frozen nightmare. Frost Camp's grip tightening with each heartbeat. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the tree line thinned. The road opened up and headlights pierced the darkness. I saw a car approaching, slow, cautious. I waved my arms, screaming, and it stopped. The driver, a local, stared at us like we'd emerged from a nightmare. Frost Camp? He asked, voice flat. You shouldn't be there. We didn't respond. We climbed into his vehicle, shivering, drenched in snow and fear, and didn't look back. Even then, in the warmth of the cab, with the road stretching safely ahead, I couldn't shake the memory of those figures, the prints in the snow, the whispers. Frost Camp didn't let you leave untouched, and I knew that one day, if I returned, it would remember me. As we drove away, the clearing disappeared behind the trees, swallowed by the storm, and I realized something I'd never forget. Some places aren't just dangerous because of nature. Some are dangerous because they test something deeper inside you, the part that wants to survive, but also the part that underestimates what silence and snow can hide. Frost Camp had taken hours from us, maybe days, though it felt longer, but it had also left a mark, a reminder that fear doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it taps, and sometimes it waits. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive. The warmth of the truck's heater pressed against our frozen skin, but it couldn't thaw the cold that had lodged itself in our bones. Every shadow in the road, every distant tree line, seemed like it could hide the shapes we'd fled. I kept thinking I saw movement in the snowbanks, glimpses of pale fingers, but Mark didn't comment, and I didn't want to say anything. Some things aren't meant to be acknowledged aloud. Some things are safer left in silence. By the time we reached McCall, the sun was low in the sky, dying behind jagged peaks. Town looked small, familiar, almost tame compared to the wilderness we'd just escaped. People bustled about, oblivious to the terror hidden in the hills. And yet, even among them, I felt the weight of Frost Camp pressing against the edges of my mind. We found a motel, cheap, with peeling paint and a heater that sputtered but kept us alive. I wanted to take a long shower, scrub the snow and ice from my skin, but I couldn't. My hands shook as I unpacked, as if moving even slightly would let the figures close in again. Mark finally spoke as we sat in the dim light of the room. Dan, did we imagine it? I didn't answer immediately. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell myself that sleep-deprived minds, the storm, the isolation had conjured it all. But deep down, I knew better. There was no imagination that left footprints circling your RV, that whispered in the walls, that waited in the trees and followed you as you fled. No, I said finally. We didn't imagine it. Something was there, something alive in the snow. Mark nodded, face pale. And it's still there, isn't it? I wanted to say no, but I couldn't. Just Frost Camp didn't stay in one place. It wasn't bound to the clearing. It lingered in memory, in instinct, in the way your body remembers fear before your mind does. That night in the motel, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the building sounded like footsteps in the snow. Every shadow outside the window felt like a figure waiting, patient, unblinking. I lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the shutters, remembering the tapping, the whispers, the scraping against the RV, and I realized something I hadn't understood on the night we fled. Frost Camp didn't just want to scare us, it wanted something from us. It wanted acknowledgement, a recognition that it existed beyond the comfort of maps, GPS, and logic. The following days were a blur of routine and nervous vigilance. We couldn't return to work immediately. Our hands were raw from shoveling snow, our nerves frayed by lack of sleep. But even in Boise, even surrounded by people, I couldn't escape it. The memory of Frost Camp was always there at the edges of vision, sometimes in the shadow of a tree, sometimes in the whisper of wind through my apartment window. Always waiting. I began to notice other signs too, small things at first, easily rationalized. Footprints in frost on my back porch, the sensation of being watched when no one was around, tapping sounds from the walls at night, faint but deliberate. I told myself it was paranoia, that the mountains hadn't followed me into town, but every instinct screamed the opposite. Frost Camp had marked me. It had followed. Mark called me one evening, voice tense. I saw them, he said, walking the roads near my place, just figures at the edge of the trees, watching. Dan, I can't sleep. I didn't argue. I couldn't. I remembered the fear, the weight pressing down in the RV, the circling footprints, the whispers. We were connected now, not just by blood and friendship, but by something deeper, something the mountains had claimed. Frost Camp didn't just end when you left the clearing. It stayed in you, in the way your mind anticipates threats, in the way your body tenses when the wind shifts. We tried to cope. Daylight hikes, visits to friends, long drives away from forests, but every snowstorm, every cold snap reminded us. Frost Camp was never far. Months passed. The The memory softened but never disappeared. I took up meditation, tried to rationalize, tried to convince myself we'd been lucky. But I knew the truth. Some places exist outside the rules we understand. Frost Camp wasn't just a clearing in Idaho. It was a reminder that nature, even in its quietest, coldest moments, holds dominion over those who wander too far. I went back once, the following winter, with Mark insisting he wouldn't. I parked near the edge of the forest, just far enough to feel the snow under my boots without stepping into the clearing. The air was still, the silence heavy, and for a brief moment I thought I saw a shadow glide past the trees, vanishing before I could focus. A whisper tickled my ear, faint, almost playful, and I realized that Frost Camp was still alive, watching, waiting. I turned away. Mark didn't need to see it to understand. Some lessons aren't learned in sunlight, aren't taught in textbooks. Some lessons are carved into the mind by the cold, by fear, by a place that doesn't forgive intrusion. Even now, when the first snow falls and the wind bites just right, I feel it. Frost Camp isn't just a memory. It's a pulse, a presence, a constant reminder that the wilderness holds more than beauty, that isolation carries more than peace. And somewhere in those frozen trees, in that clearing where the RV sits buried beneath snow each winter, Frost Camp waits, patient, deliberate, eternal. We were lucky, I think, lucky to leave with our lives, our minds mostly intact. But the mark remains. A shiver when the wind howls, a pause when the snow crunches underfoot, a whisper in the night, just enough to remind me that some places don't like visitors, and some visitors once marked are never truly free. Winter came again, heavier than the year before. The first snow fell in thick, relentless flakes, coating everything in white silence. I could feel it before I even looked outside, the pull of Frost Camp, distant yet insistent, tugging at the edges of my mind. Mark hadn't wanted to return. I didn't blame him. None of us wanted to. But sometimes the memory demands attention, refuses to fade quietly. I found myself driving north again, RV packed, heater humming, snow swirling in the headlights. Each mile brought that familiar tension, that tightening in my chest. It's hard to explain if you haven't been there, but it's more than fear. It's the sense that something is aware, that the land itself is conscious and patient, measuring your courage, your curiosity, your very will to survive. By the time I arrived at the clearing, Frost Camp looked deceptively quiet. The fire rings were buried under a foot of snow. The skeletal posts leaned like old sentinels. The tree line stood motionless, almost reverent, as if acknowledging my presence without judgment. But the stillness was a warning, not a welcome. I could feel the eyes on me. I parked the RV, heart hammering, and stepped out into the snow. Boots sank into the icy crust. My breath rose in clouds. The silence was absolute, oppressive. I walked the perimeter, checking the snow for prints, for signs of movement. Nothing. For a moment, relief flickered. Perhaps it had all been in my mind last year. Then I heard it. The tapping, not faint, not distant, sharp, deliberate, close, on the metal roof of the RV. 3, pause, 2, just as it had been the night we fled. My stomach turned. The snow beneath my feet felt suddenly treacherous, as if each step was being watched, counted, catalogued. I remembered Mark, asleep in the cab last year, shaking with fear. I remembered the whispering, the gliding figures, the prints circling us like a slow heartbeat in the snow. And I realized fully that Frost Camp doesn't let go. It doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget. I raised my eyes to the tree line. Shadows shifted. Pale, thin figures emerged, just at the edge of the clearing. Not human, not animal, something in between. They moved like smoke, silent and purposeful, gliding closer, observing. I froze. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused. Then came the whispering. Not one voice, but many. A chorus carried on the wind through the pines. It spoke directly to the corners of my mind. Remember, you cannot leave, not truly. I realized then that the clearing, the RV, the snow, they were vessels. Frost Camp had chosen us, marked us, and it wanted acknowledgement, an understanding that it was alive, eternal, patient. I stepped forward slowly, my boots crunching in the snow. The figures didn't advance, didn't retreat. They waited. And I spoke, not out loud, but in thought, letting my fear and respect pour into the silence. I see you. I know you're here. I understand. The wind seemed to still. The tapping paused. The snow settled gently like it had heard me, like it recognized my words. The figures lingered, then slowly receded, drifting back into the forest, leaving only the silent trees and frozen clearing behind. I stayed there until the sun dipped below the peaks, turning the snow to gold. The stillness was no longer oppressive, but heavy with meaning. Frost Camp was not just a place of fear, it was a mirror. It reflected the parts of ourselves we ignore, the instincts we dismiss, the courage we hide, the terror we deny. Surviving it didn't just require running. It required seeing, acknowledging, respecting. When I returned to Boise, Mark was waiting. He didn't ask, didn't need to. I could see it in his eyes. The same recognition, the same quiet mark of experience that binds those who faced Frost Camp and lived. We didn't speak of the details. We didn't need to. Silence became our language, heavier than words. Even now, years later, when snow blankets the ground and the wind whispers through the trees, I feel it. The pull of Frost Camp, patient, deliberate, eternal. Not malevolent, not cruel, but real. Waiting, watching, teaching. And I know with a certainty that chills me deeper than any winter night that some places are not meant to be conquered, only understood. Some fears are not meant to vanish, they are meant to guide us, to remind us that the world is bigger, older, and stranger than we can imagine. Frost Camp near McCall is one of those places. I carry it with me in my chest, in my pulse, in the way I step carefully in the snow, in the way I listen to the wind. It taught me something that no calm lake or sunny clearing ever could. That survival is not just about fleeing the storm, but about recognizing the storm within yourself, acknowledging it, and moving forward with respect for the power that surrounds you. And that is the lesson of Frost Camp. A lesson written not in words, but in snow, in silence, in fear. A lesson I will never forget, and one I know will never forget me. I always thought the nights in rural Kentucky carried a kind of hush that settled on your bones, like the silence was stitched into the earth itself. When I first signed up to be a sheriff's deputy in Clay County, I didn't think I'd end up patrolling RV parks, but most nights, that's where the strange calls came from. Families passing through, old-timers living month to month on pensions, out-of-staters looking for cheap land to camp. It was all kinds. I'd learned quick that the woods around here didn't care who you were. The dark rolled in the same for everyone. It was a Thursday night in early fall, the kind of night where the crickets quiet down just enough to make you wonder if they know something you don't. Dispatch rang in with a call from one of the county's older RV parks, a place called Mill Creek Pines. Folks said it had been around since the 70s. Back when camping had that roadside Americana romance to it. These days, the paint peeled off the bathhouse doors, the laundry machine stayed broken, and half the sites stood empty. Still, the call came in. Reports of knocking on camper doors, 3 times, always around midnight. I drove out there with the windows cracked, the night air damp, carrying that smell of wet pine needles and clay mud. My cruiser headlights cut through the mist pooling low along the 2-lane road. Mill Creek Pines sat back a ways, tucked against the tree line. Its wooden sign leaned sideways, letters faded but still legible. I rolled through the gravel loop, tires crunching, scanning the sights. A couple rigs sat under yellow porch lights, most with curtains drawn. The park manager, old boy named Ray, flagged me down near the office shack. "Sheriff, it ain't just kids," he said before I could even get out of the car. His hands trembled, cigarette ember bouncing in the dark. "Folks been calling me near hysterical. They say it's the same sound, 3 knocks. But when they open up, nobody's there." I studied him. Ray was a hard man, not prone to superstition. I asked who'd complained, and he pointed me toward the back row, spaces 27 through 31, tucked closest to the woods. I walked slow, letting the beam of my flashlight slice through the damp air. Gravel shifted under my boots. It was quiet enough that every step echoed. I could smell campfire smoke, faint but dying, mixed with the wet tang of earth, the kind of scent that made you think of old caves. Site 27 held a fifth-wheel camper, white with blue stripes. The porch light flickered, moths swarming. A woman stepped out as I approached, robe pulled tight. Her eyes darted left and right like she expected something behind her. "You're the deputy?" she asked. I nodded. "It came again last night, 3 knocks. Right on the door. My husband got up, opened it, and there wasn't a soul in sight. Just quiet. We thought maybe somebody was drunk, playing games. But tonight, it felt wrong, like it knew we'd be listening." Her words stuck to me, like it knew. I promised I'd patrol through the night. She didn't look relieved, just studied my face like she wanted me to tell her what was real. I made rounds, cutting across the back lots, checking shadows between the rigs. The deeper I went, the heavier the silence grew. It pressed in like the forest itself was watching. And that's when I heard it. 3 knocks. They came sharp, deliberate, on metal, too solid to mistake for branches or animals. I froze, swinging my flashlight, beam darting across aluminum siding and darkened windows. Nothing moved. I jogged toward the sound, heart thudding against my vest, but when I rounded the corner, all I caught was stillness. One camper's door hung half open, swaying with the draft. Inside, a family whispered quick, panicked breaths. "Did you hear it?" the man asked, clutching a baseball bat. I nodded. "Stay inside. Lock it up." I circled wide, tracing the line of trees. The woods looked blacker than ink, a curtain of trunks and bramble. My radio crackled static, faint but uneasy, like the signal bent under the weight of something nearby. I called back to dispatch, just to test, but my voice came out strange, muffled, like I was speaking underwater. I didn't like it. Not one bit. The knocks didn't come again that night, though I stayed till dawn, headlights washing the empty sites as the sky bled gray. By the time the sun hit the mist, the campers looked almost peaceful, like nothing had happened. But I drove home unsettled because I knew what I'd heard. The following night, I came back on my own, no call-in. Some things you don't leave alone. I parked near the bathhouse, cut the engine, and just listened. Crickets chirped, an owl hooted once, then the woods sank back into that Kentucky quiet. Midnight crept up. The campground seemed to hold its breath. Then it started. 3 knocks. Not at one camper, but at several. The sound echoed, traveling site to site like someone walking a straight line. Bam, bam, bam. Always 3, always measured. My skin prickled. I jogged toward the first sound, but by the time I got there, silence. Then it came again, farther down. It was like something toyed with us, just out of sight, skipping through the dark. I caught myself whispering under my breath, half a prayer, half a warning, don't follow it. But my boots kept moving anyway. Near the tree line, I saw it. A figure, too tall, shoulders wrong, head tilted at an unnatural angle. My flashlight beam quivered across bark, but when it touched the shape, it dissolved. Not vanished, not fled, just thinned into the mist, leaving my lungs empty. I stood there, staring into the black woods, and for the first time in years on this job, I felt sob. I felt small, like a boy again, lost in the holler, listening for footsteps that shouldn't be there. That was the first week. Calls kept coming after that, and every time I answered, the same thing. Knocks that traveled, doors opening to nothing, whispers about shadows nobody wanted to describe. Folks started leaving early, cutting their trips short. Mill Creek Pines grew quieter, lonelier, but the knocks never stopped, and I kept going back. By the second week, I knew Mill Creek Pines was changing. It wasn't just the campers anymore. Even the regulars, the old-timers who'd lived in their rigs for years, started pulling stakes. They didn't leave with noise or fuss, just slipped away quiet like the silence itself had told them it was time. Ray, the manager, kept the lights on at the office, though half the bulbs flickered, casting more shadow than glow. He'd sit out front in a plastic chair, a rifle leaning against the siding, eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept. "They come earlier now," he told me one night. His voice rasped like gravel. Not just midnight, sometimes 10, sometimes just after sundown. And Sheriff, he paused, shaking his head, "I swear I seen someone knock on my door last night, but it wasn't a man. It leaned close, and I could hear it breathing through the wood. I didn't answer. I ain't a fool." I wanted to tell him it was stress, fatigue, the tricks of an aging mind, but I couldn't, because I'd heard it too. That night, I parked in the back row, windows cracked. My cruiser felt like a coffin, the metal shell holding me in while the world outside waited. The air was thick, the kind that presses against your skin. I could hear the faint trickle of the creek beyond the trees. And underneath it, something softer, a tapping. Not 3 knocks this time, just one. A slow, hollow thump against the side of my car. I snapped my flashlight up, heart pounding so hard my ribs hurt. Nothing. Gravel. A moth beating itself senseless against the glass. But the sound had been real. I knew the weight of it. I stepped out, every nerve sharp. My boots pressed into the gravel, and in the silence that followed, I realized the crickets had gone still again. That hush stretched across the park, thick and unnatural, as if every living thing had pulled back, waiting. Then I heard it. Not knocking this time, breathing. It came from the woods, deep, measured breaths, pulling the air in, letting it out, too steady for an animal, too heavy for a man. Who's there? My voice cracked more than I wanted it to. The breaths paused. Silence clamped down again. My flashlight swept across trunks, branches, underbrush. Mist pooled low, curling around the bases of the trees. For a moment, the beam caught something pale. A hand? No, too long. Fingers that bent wrong, curling in on themselves. Then gone. I didn't chase it. Not that night. I climbed back into the cruiser, locked the doors, and sat stiff as stone until dawn. When the sun finally burned through the mist, I felt like I'd survived something, not solved it, not ended it, just outlasted it for one more night. Word got around town. Folks whispered about Mill Creek Pines at the diner, in the pews at Sunday service. Some said it was teenagers messing with outsiders. Some muttered about old burial grounds. And some, the oldest families in the county, just got quiet when the subject came up. Quiet in that way that says they've heard it all before. The sheriff himself, my boss, told me to let it go. People spook easy, he said. If they want to leave that campground, let 'em. Ain't our job to fight ghosts. But he wasn't there at midnight. He hadn't heard the knocks. The next time I went, I brought company. Deputy Tyler, fresh out of the academy, sharp but green. He'd laughed when I asked him to ride along. By the second hour, his hands shook on his flashlight. We sat near Site 29, a pull-through lot pressed against the trees. The camper there had left 2 nights earlier, abandoning a picnic table and a string of Christmas lights. The lights still hung, bulbs dark, swaying in the breeze. Around 11, the air shifted. You don't notice it right away. It's not colder, not hotter, just heavier, like the air grows thick enough to choke on. Tyler stiffened. You feel that? I nodded. Then came the knocks. 3 of them, hard and even against the side of an empty camper. We both spun, flashlights cutting through the dark. Nothing there. Then another set, farther down, then another. It moved like a pattern, weaving through the sights, circling. Tyler's voice shook. It's playing with us. I couldn't argue. We followed the sound to the tree line, and there, clear as day in the beam of his light, we saw footprints. Bare. Human-sized but wider, the toes pressed long into the mud. They led straight into the trees. Tyler cursed under his breath. What the hell walks barefoot out here? Before I could answer, the breathing started again. Louder this time, right behind the first row of trunks. We both froze, lights trained forward. The sound drew closer, each inhale rattling like it dragged through water. Then a shape. Not a man. Taller, shoulders hunched forward, head cocked at that same impossible angle I'd seen before. The beam caught its face, or what should have been one. Smooth. No eyes, no mouth, just skin, pale and stretched. Tyler stumbled back, nearly dropping his light. The thing leaned forward, as if listening, as if the knocks weren't just sounds but a language, and then it vanished. Not into the mist this time. Not with speed. Just gone, like it stepped sideways out of this world. Tyler looked at me, face white as chalk. We can't stay here. But I did. We both did, because duty keeps you rooted even when every part of your body screams run. When dawn came, Tyler swore he'd never set foot in that park again. He put in for a transfer 2 weeks later. I didn't blame him. Me, though, I couldn't leave it. Something about Mill Creek Pines held me fast. The knocks weren't random, they weren't senseless. They meant something, and I was too far gone to ignore it. So I went back, night after night, listening, waiting, trying to understand. And that's when the knocks changed. Instead of 3, they came in 2s. Sharp. Hollow. And after the second knock, I began to hear something else. A voice. Not loud, not clear. Just a whisper, sliding under the knocks like a secret carried through wood. A single word too faint to catch at first. But each night, it grew sharper. By the third night, I could make it out. My name. When I first heard it, I thought I was losing my mind. My name, whispered low, carried in the same rhythm as the knocks. 2 raps, a pause, then that hushed syllable drawn out from nowhere. It wasn't like someone calling me across a room. It was closer. Inside the wood, inside the air itself. The first time I sat frozen in my cruiser, refusing to believe it. The second time, I got out and followed. My boots pressed deep into the gravel, each step louder than I wanted it to be. I moved between the darkened rigs, their windows black, curtains drawn like eyelids refusing to open. The sound led me past Site 29, past the bathhouse with its broken lights, and down toward the creek. The water glistened faintly under the moon, running slow, carrying the smell of mud and algae. That's where I heard it clearest. The knocks against the bark of a tree this time, and the whisper curling out after, James. My name. Plain as if it had been spoken into my ear. I stood rooted, mouth dry. There wasn't another soul in sight, just the ripple of water, the croak of a lone frog, and that breath of sound calling me. James. I raised my flashlight, sweeping across the tree line. My beam caught the rough ridges of bark, the gleam of damp moss, the empty stretch of bank. And then it landed on something carved deep into the wood. 3 symbols. Not letters I recognized, not numbers either. Just jagged lines intersecting, a pattern sharp and deliberate. The cuts were fresh, sap bleeding bright against the dark bark. My hand shook as I reached out, tracing the grooves. Cold, too cold for wood. My fingers ached the moment they touched it, as though the tree itself rejected the contact. The whisper came again, louder. James. I staggered back, boots sliding in the mud. My radio crackled on my belt, a burst of static that pierced the silence. I grabbed it, forcing my voice steady. Dispatch. This is Deputy. The rest dissolved. Only static answered me. Not even the hiss of open air, but a thick, wet crackle like someone breathing into the line. That's when the knocks moved again. Not one tree, but many. Like a row of them being struck in sequence, traveling closer, closer, circling. I turned, and for a second I swore I saw shapes in the mist rising from the creek. Tall, shifting figures with shoulders that brushed against branches, faces hidden in shadow. Each step they took, the earth seemed to groan, and yet they made no sound of their own. I ran. I won't lie about it. I'm not proud, but I ran straight back toward the gravel loop, lungs burning, the whisper chasing me like smoke in the wind. When I slammed the cruiser door shut and locked it, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I stared at my reflection in the windshield, pale and wild-eyed, and told myself I'd never go back. But I did, because the next day, Ray called me, voice ragged, begging. You gotta come, Sheriff. Folks are hearing things in the day now. In broad daylight, the knocks don't wait till night. Please. So I went. Mill Creek Pines looked different in daylight, and that was almost worse. The sunlight exposed the cracks, the rot, the bones of the place. Empty campsites sat littered with broken lawn chairs and rusted grills. The laundry shack door hung open, banging soft in the breeze. And yet, even under the sun, the silence clung. The birds didn't sing here anymore. Ray met me at the office, eyes bloodshot, voice low. It ain't just knocking, Sheriff. It talks now. Says things. What things? I asked. He glanced toward the woods before answering. Names. That word cut into me. I walked the grounds in broad daylight, and sure enough, I heard it. Not as loud, not as sharp, but present. A hollow tap against the siding of a camper. 2 knocks. Then a faint murmur, curling just out of reach, like it wanted me to lean closer. I didn't. Instead, I pulled open the abandoned camper at Site 29. Inside, the air was stale, thick with mildew. The walls bore scratches, thin lines etched like something had dragged nails across the paneling. The table still held 2 mugs, half full of moldy coffee, as if the people had left mid-sip. And on the wall above the sink, scrawled in what looked like charcoal, was a phrase, "Answer," and it follows. I shut the door and walked out, sweat rolling cold down my back despite the heat. That night, I stayed again. Not in the cruiser this time. I brought a chair and sat outside near the bathhouse, flashlight in one hand, service weapon in the other. Midnight came. The air thickened, and the knocks returned, 3 at first, then 2, and then the whisper, low and patient. "James." I clenched my jaw, refusing to answer. My chest ached from holding my breath. The knocks moved behind me on the bathhouse door. I didn't turn. "James," the voice slid again, like silk dragging over stone. My radio hissed to life. Not static this time. A woman's voice, broke and strained. "Help us." It cut through me. My blood turned cold because I knew that voice. I didn't want to, but I did. It was a girl who'd gone missing 2 summers back, last seen near a campground on the edge of the county. We never found her. I gripped the radio, heart hammering. "Where are you?" Static swallowed the words. Then faint. "Here." The knocks thundered all at once, pounding on every camper in earshot, a chorus that rattled metal and shook glass. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, but it pressed through, vibrating in my bones. When it stopped, the silence felt heavier than sound. I raised my head. The campground sat still. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. And then from the tree line, I saw it again. The faceless figure. Taller now, closer. It leaned against a tree like it had all the time in the world. And this time, I swear I could feel it smiling, though there was no mouth to see. I stood, raised my weapon, and shouted, "Stay back!" The figure tilted its head, listening, and then it lifted one long arm and knocked, twice, against the tree. The whisper followed, curling around my name. I didn't fire. My hand shook too hard, and deep down I knew bullets wouldn't matter. Instead, I backed away, step by step, until the cruiser was behind me. I climbed in, locked the doors, and drove without looking back. But even with the windows up, I could still hear it. 2 knocks, and my name. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of my house, every groan of the old floorboards felt like a knock. I caught myself holding my breath in the dark, listening for whispers that didn't belong. The thing wasn't just at Mill Creek Pines anymore. It had followed me home, or maybe it had always been there, waiting for me to invite it closer. I sat in the kitchen until dawn, gun on the table, coffee untouched. By the time the sun rose, I convinced myself it had all been in my head. Stress. Fatigue. A deputy chasing shadows when he should have let it go. But when I stepped outside, I saw them. Knocks. 2 of them, side by side, carved into my front door. The edges were raw, fresh. I called in sick that day, though I didn't tell the sheriff why. What was I supposed to say? That something in the woods had learned my name? That it knew where I lived? He would have taken my badge on the spot. But that night, I drove back to Mill Creek Pines anyway. I told myself it was duty. Truth was, I needed answers. The campground was emptier than I'd ever seen it. Only 2 rigs remained, their porch lights glowing weak and lonely. Ray sat outside the office, hunched over, his rifle across his knees. He looked up when my headlights washed over him, and for the first time, I saw fear plain on his face. "They're inside now," he rasped. "What do you mean?" I asked, stepping out. "They don't just knock. They walk. I heard them in the bathhouse, boots on tile, but when I opened the door, there wasn't a thing there." He stared at me, eyes bloodshot. "You hear it too, don't you?" I didn't answer, because I did. That night, I chose to stake out the bathhouse. I sat on the bench outside, back pressed against the cool concrete wall. The place reeked of mildew and bleach, the broken light above me buzzing like a dying hornet. Midnight passed. The woods held their breath. Then footsteps, clear as my own. Heavy, slow, crossing the tile inside. I rose, flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other. My heart hammered so loud I thought it would give me away. I pressed against the doorframe, listening. The steps paused, then came again, closer this time. I shoved the door open. The beam of my light swept across cracked sinks, rusted stalls, and puddles of water. Empty. No movement. No one there. But the footsteps hadn't stopped. They echoed, bouncing against the walls, circling me. My beam caught the reflection of water rippling in the sinks, disturbed by something unseen. And then, clear as a voice beside me, the whisper came. "James." I spun, but the stalls stood empty. My throat tightened. I stumbled back outside into the night air, gulping it down like I'd been drowning. That's when I saw the campers, both rigs still lit, but their doors hung open. Curtains fluttered in the breeze. I sprinted to the first one, shouting. No answer. Inside, it was deserted, food half prepared on the counter, a TV still humming static. No people. The second rig was the same, a radio crackling faint in the corner, shoes by the door, no one inside. They were gone. Just like that. I bolted back toward the office. Ray was gone, too. His chair empty, his rifle leaning against the wall. The only sound left was the low moan of wind moving through the pines, and then knocks. 2 of them. Not from the campers, not from the trees. From every surface at once. Wood, metal, glass. A chorus of sounds surrounding me. The ground beneath my boots seemed to shiver with it. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the knocks pressed through, pounding inside my chest. My vision swam, and underneath it all, the whisper wound tighter, louder, as if dozens of voices spoke together in unison. James. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the gravel. My cruiser sat ahead, headlights dim in the mist. I lunged for it, fumbling with the door handle. My hands were slick with sweat, useless. The knocking drew closer, louder. Each beat rattled the cruiser, denting the metal. I got inside, slammed the lock down, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared, tires spitting gravel as I tore out of the loop. In the rear view, I caught a glimpse. Figures. Dozens of them, tall and pale, standing in the middle of the campground. Watching. No faces. Just smooth skin where features should have been. Their heads tilted, all at the same angle, like they shared one thought. They didn't move, didn't chase, just stood and listened as I fled. I drove until my gaslight came on, every mile dragging me farther from Clay County, from Mill Creek Pines, from whatever had decided to claim it. But even as the highway stretched ahead, even as the dawn painted the horizon, I could still hear it. 2 knocks, and my name. When I pulled into a rest stop, I sat there trembling, head in my hands. My badge felt heavy on my chest, my pistol useless on my hip. I'd never felt so hollow, so emptied out by fear. And yet, part of me knew I'd go back, because it wasn't finished with me, and I wasn't finished with it. I didn't file a report about that night. What could I write? Deputy observes faceless figures in mist, hears disembodied voices, flees scene in state of panic. They'd have stripped my badge, sent me for evaluation, maybe locked me up. So I said nothing, but silence doesn't mean peace. The knocks followed me, even on patrol in broad daylight. I'd be parked on the side of Route 662, writing a citation, and from the trunk of my cruiser, knock, knock. I'd answer a call in town, kids loitering at the gas station, and as the screen door slammed shut, 2 hollow strikes, like it knew I was listening. I started sleeping in my uniform, gun belt draped over the chair by my bed. Coffee became survival fuel, though it couldn't keep the exhaustion from creeping in. When I did sleep, the dreams came, always the same, the faceless figures standing just beyond reach, their heads tilted, waiting. And the whisper, curling soft and patient, James. I told myself I could outrun it, so I tried. On my days off, I drove 2 counties over, parked at motels that smelled like bleach and cigarette smoke, left the TV running all night to drown out silence. But even there, in places far from the pines, the knocks came. In the pipes. In the walls. In the frame of the bed itself. There's no outrunning something that knows your name. One night, after a string of sleepless days, I found myself driving back to Mill Creek Pines. Not for duty. Not for Ray, wherever he'd gone, but because I needed to see it with my own eyes again. If it was going to haunt me, I had to face it. The sign at the entrance hung crooked, one chain broken. The gravel drive stretched ahead, overgrown with weeds pushing up through the stones. My headlights swept across empty sites, grass reclaiming what had once been tidy lots. Every camper was gone. Even the laundry shack stood hollow, its door ripped from the hinges. But the silence It was thicker than before, as if the whole place had drowned in it. I parked at the office, stepped out, and the air hit me like a wall. Damp, heavy, carrying the faint rot of leaves and something else, something sweet, cloying like fruit left too long in the sun. The office door was ajar. Inside, Ray's chair sat overturned, his rifle gone. Papers littered the desk, maps of the park with scribbled notes in the margins, circles drawn around certain sites, 29, 34, 12, and across the bottom of the map, in handwriting so jagged it cut through the page, 3 words, "Don't answer back." I shoved the paper in my jacket, though I don't know why. Proof, maybe, or just something to hold on to, something real. That's when the first knock came. 2 of them, sharp, hollow, from the wall beside me. I froze, breath caught. The air pressed closer, wrapping tight around my ribs. Then, from the far side of the park, another set, and another. Traveling fast, circling, drawing nearer, the whispers followed. Not just my name this time. Other names slipping through the air like threads pulled tight. Some I didn't recognize. Some I did. People who'd gone missing, folks whose families still asked questions. Voices that had no business being here. I stumbled back to the cruiser, fumbling with the handle. My reflection in the glass looked pale, hollow-eyed, a man worn thin. I wanted to leave. I should have left, but I didn't, because in the middle of the knocking, one whisper rose clearer than the rest. A child's voice, fragile, frightened. "Help me." It cut straight through my chest. I thought of the girl on the radio, the one we'd never found. I thought of her parents, who still put up flyers even after 2 years. I thought of all the names scribbled on missing persons reports, tucked away in file cabinets gathering dust. If I ran, I'd be abandoning them. So I turned. The knocks had drawn me to the creek. The mist lay heavy there, curling low across the water. Trees loomed on either side, their trunks marked with the same jagged carvings I'd seen before, symbols etched deep, bleeding sap. The figures were waiting. Dozens of them, pale and faceless, standing silent at the edge of the mist, their heads tilted in unison. They didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. My flashlight flickered in my hand. I raised it anyway, beam cutting across their bodies. Skin stretched smooth, long arms hanging too low, fingers grazing the ground. They stood like statues, yet every nerve in my body screamed they were alive. Then the knocking began again. Not on wood, not on metal, on me. 2 sharp strikes, rattling inside my chest, vibrating through my ribs. I staggered, clutching at myself, and the whisper came low and close, as if spoken from inside my own head. "James." I dropped to my knees, fighting for breath. My vision swam, edges darkening. The urge to answer welled up, not in my throat but deeper, like something pushing from the inside out. If I said a word, I knew it would take me. But over that suffocating pressure, I heard the child's voice again. "Please." I forced myself to stand, legs shaking. "Where are you?" I shouted into the mist. The whispers swelled, overlapping, angry now, each one sharper, faster. The knocks hammered from all directions, shaking the trees, rattling the earth itself. The figures leaned closer, shoulders hunched, tilting, tilting. And then, silence. The figures straightened. The mist pulled back, curling away like smoke and wind, and for a single heartbeat, I saw something else. A cabin. Small. Rotted, sitting deep in the woods beyond the creek. A lantern glowed faint inside. A girl's face at the window, pale, lips moving though I couldn't hear her. Then it was gone. The clearing lay empty, the water still. My knees buckled, and I collapsed against the mud, sweat pouring down my face. My breath came ragged, my chest still echoing with phantom knocks. I don't know how long I lay there. When I finally staggered back to the cruiser, dawn was breaking, a pale light filtering through the trees. The park looked ordinary again, like it always did in daylight. Just another forgotten patch of Kentucky woods, but I knew better. I drove home hollow. The image of that girl's face burned behind my eyes. Mill Creek Pines wasn't just haunted, it was hunting. And whatever it wanted, it wasn't finished. Not with me. Not with anyone. Back at home, I couldn't shake the image of that cabin. The lantern glow, the girl's face pressed to the window. It played over and over whenever I closed my eyes. I found myself sketching it on scraps of paper. trying to capture the angle of the roof, the shape of the window. But the harder I tried, the more it slipped away, like smoke curling through my fingers. The files in the station didn't help. I spent hours hunched over the missing persons cabinet, thumbing through reports from the past decade. Families torn apart, parents left waiting, most cases unsolved. A good number of them had one thing in common: last seen near campgrounds. A handful even at Mill Creek Pines. That park wasn't cursed by chance. It was a magnet, drawing people in, swallowing them whole, leaving only echoes behind. I didn't tell the sheriff what I was digging through. He'd already warned me off. "You're chasing shadows," he'd said when I tried to bring it up before. "If folks disappeared out there, it's drugs, it's debts, it's people walking away from their lives. Don't go putting spooks in it." But I knew better. And the truth was, I was already too deep. The knocks followed me everywhere, in the hollow thump of my boots on the porch, in the distant banging of pipes beneath the station, in my own heartbeat when the silence stretched too long. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, and hear them answer back from inside the walls. 2 knocks. Always 2, and the whisper of my name curling soft in the dark. I started drinking more than I should have, bourbon in the evenings, just enough to take the edge off, but it didn't silence the knocks. If anything, it made them sharper, more insistent. Like the thing knew I was trying to dull myself against it, and it refused to be ignored. By the 3rd week, I knew I couldn't just sit and wait. If I didn't face it, it would hollow me out, piece by piece, until nothing was left. So, I went back. Mill Creek Pines was almost unrecognizable now. The weeds had risen taller, twisting across the gravel lanes. The office stood dark, windows broken. A buzzard circled overhead, wings black against the gray sky. I parked by the creek, the map from Ray's desk still folded in my jacket. The circled sites stared back at me, 29, 34, 12, each one marked like a wound. I picked the closest. Site 12 sat in a bend near the water, trees crowding close. The fire pit was filled with ash, damp and untouched. But the trees around it bore the same carvings, jagged symbols etched deep, their lines raw like they'd been cut only days ago. I ran my hand over one, the bark cold under my palm. My chest tightened. 2 knocks, soft, hollow, came from the ground beneath me. I froze, ears straining. Then again, 2 more. Not from the trees this time, from below. The earth. I dropped to my knees, brushing away leaves, clawing at the soil with bare hands. The dirt was damp, heavy, clinging to my nails, and beneath it I found wood, splintered, rotted, but unmistakably a board, a cover. I scraped harder, revealing more. A square outline, a trapdoor, half collapsed with age. The knocks came again, rattling through the wood, vibrating up into my bones. I hesitated, heart hammering. Everything in me screamed to stop, to walk away. But then I heard it, the child's voice again. Fainter this time, like it was drifting up through water. "Please." I pried the door open. The hinges groaned, coughing up a breath of air so cold it burned my lungs. A black hole yawned beneath, swallowing the light. A ladder led down, rungs rusted and slick with moss. I raised my flashlight. The beam cut into the dark, catching dirt walls, the faint outline of a tunnel stretching deep beneath the campground. And far down the passage, a flicker, like a lantern glow. The same light I'd seen in the vision by the creek. I swallowed hard, gripping the ladder. Every instinct screamed to seal it up, to walk away, to let the earth keep its secrets. But I thought of the voices, the names whispered in the night, the girl's face at the window. If I turned away, they'd be nothing but echoes forever. So I climbed down. The air grew damp and foul the deeper I went, thick with the stench of rot and something chemical, sharp and biting. The dirt walls closed in tight, forcing me to duck low. My light shook in my hand, shadows bending and twisting across the earth. The knocks followed me, not from behind this time, from ahead. 2 strikes, sharp, ringing through the tunnel. Then silence, then again, drawing me forward. Each step sank deeper into the mud. My breath fogged the beam of my light, and with every exhale I swore I could see shapes curling in the mist. Faces forming, dissolving, watching. At last I reached a chamber. wider, ceiling high enough to stand. And there it was, the cabin. Not wood and nails like I'd expected, but something built into the earth itself. A facade of planks hammered into the dirt wall, a crooked door, a single window glowing with lantern light. I froze, every muscle locked. My heart slammed against my ribs. The knocks came again, this time from the door, 2 sharp raps, and the whisper followed, low and patient. James. I raised my weapon, though it felt useless, more like a comfort than a defense. My hand shook. My throat ached. I stepped closer, mud sucking at my boots. The window glowed faint, and in it a face appeared. The girl, pale, wide-eyed, lips moving, forming words I couldn't hear, her hand pressed against the glass. Behind her, in the lantern glow, shapes stirred. Tall, faceless, leaning forward as one, and then the door began to open. The door creaked as it opened, slow and deliberate, the hinges groaning like an old man's breath. The lantern inside threw long shadows across the chamber, stretching and bending until they reached for me. My chest tightened with each inch the door gave way, until there was enough of a gap for the cold to slip out. It wrapped around me like water, seeping into my bones. I should have run. I knew that. But something deeper pulled me forward, the same way a cliff edge tempts a man to lean just a little too far. I stepped through. The air inside was worse than the tunnel, wet, metallic, carrying the stench of rust and blood. My light cut across the cramped space. A table with rotted wood, a lantern sputtering on its last oil, walls braced with planks that had warped with damp, and the girl. She stood in the corner, hair matted, eyes wide. Her lips moved in silent plea, and when my light landed fully on her, I saw the truth. Her feet didn't touch the ground. She hovered inches above it, her toes pointed down, straining like a puppet pulled by invisible strings, her hand pressed against the wall, not the window I thought I'd seen. And on her skin, etched deep, were the same jagged symbols I'd seen carved into the trees. My throat clenched. I wanted to call to her, to tell her it was okay, but the words stuck. My tongue felt heavy, my mouth full of dust. The knocks came again, not from the walls this time, from her. Her head tilted and her hands struck the wood behind her twice. Hollow, sharp. The sound shook the chamber, and then the whisper followed. James. It came from her mouth, but her lips hadn't moved. Her eyes were locked on me, wide and terrified, even as the sound slid out of her like smoke. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My gun felt like dead weight. My light shook, dancing shadows across the walls, and then the figures stepped forward. They poured from the darkness beyond the cabin walls, faceless and tall, shoulders brushing the ceiling. Dozens of them. Their movements were wrong, too fluid, like water spilling where bodies should move. They circled, heads tilting in unison, listening, always listening. The girl's body twitched, her arms jerking as if strings pulled tighter. Her mouth opened wider than it should, and the whispers multiplied, overlapping, filling the chamber with a storm of voices. Names. Dozens of them. Each one a person I'd read about in those case files. Each one a ghost carried on her breath. And then mine. James. The sound hit harder than before, vibrating in my skull. My knees buckled. I dropped, palms pressing into the mud floor, trying to hold myself steady as the world tilted. The urge to answer clawed at me, deeper than thought, deeper than will. It rose like a sickness, like drowning, like being pulled under. I bit down hard, blood filling my mouth, forcing myself silent. The girl's eyes locked onto mine. In them I saw something human, something begging. Her lips moved, but the whispers drowned her out. Still, I could read the words. Don't answer. The knocks came again, faster now, everywhere at once. The walls, the floor, my own chest. The figures leaned closer, their faceless heads nearly brushing against me. The noise drilled into my skull until I thought it would split. And then, sudden as it started, silence. Every figure froze. The girl hung limp, head slumped forward, hair veiling her face. The lantern sputtered, dimming, shadows stretching longer, deeper. And in that silence I heard it, not a whisper, not a knock. Breathing, low, wet, right beside my ear. I spun, flashlight beam cutting through empty space. Nothing, but the breath stayed, hot against my skin. Say it. a voice growled, lower than the whispers, scraping like stone on stone. I clenched my jaw, shaking my head. Say it. The air thickened. My lungs refused to fill. The figures shifted closer, their faceless heads tilting, until they nearly brushed against me. My chest screamed for air, for sound, for anything to release the pressure. And then the girl's head snapped up. Her lips moved fast, urgent. Her hand struck the wall twice. Knock, knock. Her eyes begged me. Run. I didn't think. I moved. I shoved through the figures, their bodies colder than ice, skin slick like wet clay. My shoulder struck wood, splintering it. The chamber howled with whispers, dozens of them, furious, overlapping. The knocks thundered, shaking the tunnel, dirt raining from above. I ran. The flashlight beam shook across the passage, barely catching the rungs of the ladder ahead. My boots slipped in the mud, hands clawing at the walls. Behind me, the voices swelled, crashing together in rage. James. The sound tore through me. My vision blurred. I lunged for the ladder, hands closing on rusted metal. I climbed, every muscle screaming, the tunnel shuddering around me. The breath of those things licked at my back, cold and wet. At the top, I burst through the trapdoor, collapsing onto the ground above. The dawn light had broken through the trees, pale and thin. The air was clean, sharp with pine. The trapdoor slammed shut behind me, not by my hand. The knocks came once more, muffled but still sharp, rattling through the earth. 2 strikes, and silence. I lay there in the dirt, chest heaving, every nerve on fire. My mind reeled, refusing to process what I'd seen. The girl's face, the figures, the voice breathing at my ear. When I finally dragged myself to the cruiser, I couldn't stop shaking. My hands left mud streaks on the wheel, my knuckles white as I gripped it. I drove. Not fast, not fleeing this time. Just steady, mile after mile, until the woods thinned and the land opened into rolling fields. Only then did I pull over, resting my forehead against the steering wheel, listening. No knocks, no whispers, just the wind. For the first time in weeks, silence felt like silence. But I knew it wasn't over. Because as I stared at the horizon, I could still see her eyes, wide, begging, locked on mine. And I knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. The knocks don't stop. They wait. And sooner or later, they'll want me back. I stayed off duty for a week after that night. Told the sheriff I'd caught a bug, something that kept me laid up in bed. Truth was, I couldn't bring myself to put the uniform back on. Couldn't bring myself to drive past the turnoff toward Mill Creek Pines. My badge sat on the nightstand, heavy as a brick, and I stared at it each morning wondering if I even deserved to wear it anymore. What good was a deputy who couldn't protect anyone? Everywhere I went, I saw reminders. Missing flyers taped to the grocery store door, empty swings in a park that should have been full of kids. The case files I'd pored over replayed in my mind like a slideshow, each name a wound, and beneath it all, the memory of that girl's face, her lips shaping words I couldn't hear, her eyes locked on mine. Don't answer. I knew I'd barely made it out because of her. She'd given me that sliver of warning when everything else wanted me silenced, and it haunted me, not just her fear, but her strength. Whatever had her, she still found the will to fight, but I couldn't save her. Not then. The knocks didn't come that week. My house was quiet. My dreams were empty, though sleep didn't bring much rest. For the first time in weeks, I could almost believe it was over. Almost. Because silence can be worse than sound. It makes you wait, wonder. Listen for the next strike. I knew the knocks weren't gone. They were biding their time. On the 7th night, just before dawn, I woke to find the map from Ray's desk spread across my table. I hadn't left it there. I'd tucked it in a drawer, locked. But there it lay, unfolded, the circles dark and sharp as fresh ink. And on the back, new words carved so deep the pen had torn through. She isn't the last. I sat there until the sun came up, staring at the page, the weight of it crushing my chest. It wasn't just about her, or Ray, or the families who'd lost someone. It was bigger. Whatever lived beneath that campground, it wasn't finished. It would keep pulling people in, keep carving names into the dark, until someone stopped it. That's when I realized leaving Clay County wouldn't matter. Resigning, handing in my badge, running for the horizon, it wouldn't matter. Because it wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who'd vanished without a trace. Everyone still to come. I didn't know what I could do. I wasn't a priest or a scientist or some kind of folklore expert. I was just a deputy with too many sleepless nights and too much fear in my chest. But I still had my badge and a voice. So I started talking, not to the sheriff, not to my unit. They wouldn't believe me. But to folks passing through, travelers who asked about campgrounds, families who mentioned Mill Creek Pines like it was still a safe place to pitch for the weekend. I told them it was closed, condemned, unsafe. I told them to steer clear to find somewhere else. I didn't give details, they'd have thought me mad, but I made sure no one wandered in blind. And little by little, word spread. Maybe it's not enough. Maybe it won't stop the knocks forever. But if it keeps one family from pulling their rig into that hollow, if it keeps one child from being swallowed by those whispers, then it matters. Still, the burden doesn't leave me. I've thought about going back down into that tunnel, about facing the cabin again. Every night I sit with a bottle half drained, staring at Ray's map, tracing the circles with my thumb. Part of me knows it'll come to that whatever lives beneath the park won't rest until it has me back in the dark waiting for me to answer. But until that day comes, I keep watch. I listen. And when I hear 2 knocks, I remind myself not to answer. Because once you do, it doesn't stop. And if you ever find yourself out in rural Kentucky, parked beneath pines that seem too quiet, with the creek running dark and the air too still, if you hear those knocks on your door after midnight, 2 sharp strikes in the silence, don't answer either. I didn't grow up in a city of lights, but in the quiet spine of the Midwest, where fields rolled into each other like waves could be so still you'd swear the stars themselves were holding their breath. My name is Daniel. I'm 42 years old, and I've spent the better part of my adult life chasing silence, real silence, the kind you only find when you steer your rig off the paved roads and into the unknown. That's what drew me into boondocking in the first place. No hookups, no campground chatter, no hum of generators bleeding into the night, just me, my RV, and the land. But silence isn't always the friend you think it is. Sometimes it hides things. Sometimes it swallows them whole. It was last spring when I drove west from Colorado Springs, the air sharp with thawing snowmelt, toward a stretch of BLM land outside Gunnison. I'd been told it was safe, wide open, with free dispersed camping along a dirt road that wound between pinon pines and pale cliffs that looked like they'd been carved by forgotten gods. The first time I saw the place, it felt too perfect. Room enough for solitude, but not so far that you couldn't hike out if something went wrong. And yet, as the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, I couldn't shake the sense that the openness itself was a trap. There were no sounds of people, no distant highway, no ranch dog barking at coyotes, just an emptiness so complete that my own breath felt like it didn't belong. I parked my RV on a flat rise overlooking a shallow wash, killed the engine, and stepped outside. The sky stretched black and endless, already pricked with stars. The air smelled of juniper resin and dry stone. Beautiful, yes, but there was something about it that prickled the back of my neck, like being watched not by a person, but by the land itself. I'd been through enough solo camps to know that paranoia could ride in on the stillness, so I laughed it off, set my leveling blocks, and got my small fire going before the desert chill settled in. That first night, I thought I'd found the perfect escape. But silence, I would learn, has layers, and if you listen long enough, you begin to hear what hides beneath. It began with a small thing, the absence of wildlife. Usually in a place like that, you expect the coyote songs to start up once darkness falls, their yips echoing across the canyons, or the scratch of something small skittering in the brush. But there was nothing, only the pop of my fire and the faint whine of the wind. My ears strained for it, almost craving some reminder that I wasn't the only living thing for miles. Instead, I got silence so thick it pressed against my eardrums until I found myself talking out loud just to break it. "Good night, world," I muttered before retreating into the RV. Inside, it should have felt safer. The thin walls, the faint glow of my lantern, the familiar creak of the cabinets when the wind hit just right. But when I lay down in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, the quiet wrapped itself tighter. I could hear my pulse, my eyelids twitched with each heartbeat, and underneath that, faint but real, I swore I heard something else. Not an animal, not the creak of the RV, something closer, a subtle shifting like the sound of someone breathing through their teeth. I sat up, holding my breath, listening. Nothing, only silence again, thick as tar. By morning, I chalked it up to the mind playing tricks. The light outside was brilliant, golden, and the land looked harmless again. I hiked the ridge, took photos of lichen-painted rocks, boiled coffee on my camp stove. But as the sun climbed, I noticed something that pulled the air right back out of me. The wash below, the one I'd camped beside, was patterned with tracks. Not animal tracks. Not tire marks. Bare feet. Dozens of them. Small, large, some overlapping as though a crowd had moved silently through the sand. I crouched down, my hands on my knees, staring. They weren't there when I parked last night. They couldn't have been. I told myself it was a trick of erosion, the wind playing patterns with the sand. Maybe some hikers had come through early. But the dirt road was empty in both directions, no dust rising, no cars in sight. And the tracks, God, the tracks. They led up toward my RV and then fanned out around it as though something had circled where I slept. That night, I kept the fire burning longer, feeding it with every branch I could scavenge. I sat in my camp chair, hat pulled low, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. The silence was thicker, if that was possible, and my nerves jumped at every crackle of burning wood. Hours passed, and then, at what must have been 2 a.m, I heard it. Not in my imagination this time, but sharp, deliberate. A knock. 3, slow and spaced out against the back wall of the RV. I froze, firelight flickering on my face, skin crawling with cold sweat. Another knock followed, lighter this time, almost playful. My instinct screamed at me to grab my flashlight, to throw the door open and shine it into the night. But some other instinct, older, deeper, held me still. I didn't want to see what might be standing there. The knocks stopped, but the silence afterward was worse. I strained to hear footsteps retreating, a rustle of movement, anything. There was nothing. Just the sound of my fire dwindling and my own shallow breaths. I couldn't take it anymore. I rushed inside, slammed the door, locked it, and sat with my back against it, clutching my flashlight like a weapon. Sleep was impossible. I kept waiting for the sound to return, but all that came was silence, so unnatural it felt alive. By dawn, my eyes were raw, my chest tight with exhaustion. I stepped out, expecting to see more footprints in the wash, maybe pressed into the dirt around the RV. But there was nothing, just my own boot tracks, already half erased by wind. The ground was smooth, undisturbed. If I hadn't been there to hear it, I might have believed it never happened. I told myself then firmly that it was stress, that I'd been too long on the road, too isolated. But as the days unfolded, the silence pressed harder. Each night, I began to notice changes. A stone that wasn't where I'd left it. My folding chair shifted slightly, facing the opposite way. Once I found the latch on the water bay open, though I'd closed it tight. Small things, little enough to doubt, but heavy enough to gnaw at me. And still, the silence grew. Not just quiet, but an absence, like something had stripped the world of sound. I couldn't hear insects, couldn't hear the faint trickle of snowmelt in the canyon anymore. At night, when I lay awake, I swore I could feel it pressing against the windows, filling every crack as though it were trying to get in. By the 5th night, I was raw, nerves fraying like rope. I told myself I'd leave in the morning, pack it up, drive out, find a crowded campground with noisy kids and barking dogs and the comfort of human chaos. But the land had other plans. That night, before I could even make the choice to leave, the land decided for me. I had gone through the usual ritual, stacking wood into a pyramid, lighting it, forcing myself to eat, even though my appetite had vanished with my sense of safety. The food tasted of nothing, chewy, flavorless. I could have been eating cardboard for all it mattered. That's what the silence did. It stole taste, stole meaning. When the fire burned down to glowing embers, I lingered outside, hoping exhaustion might drag me faster if I delayed crawling back into the RV. The stars were so sharp they almost hurt to look at, thousands of them bleeding light onto the barren hills. And that was when I noticed it. The embers weren't crackling, they just glowed, motionless, as if the air had been sucked away. I leaned forward, frowning, poking at the fire with a stick. Not even a hiss of oxygen. And then, somewhere in that oppressive void, I heard a sound, if you could call it that. A hollow intake, like someone trying to breathe but pulling nothing in. It came from the ridge above me. My head whipped up. Nothing but dark brush swaying slightly in the moonlight. The silence shifted. It no longer pressed from the outside in. It pressed from within me. My heartbeat thundered, but I could barely hear it. It was as though something was muffling my very body, turning me into part of the landscape's stillness. I stumbled back toward the RV, the stick falling from my hand, and I nearly ripped the door off its hinges, scrambling inside. Once in, I shut the blinds, locked every latch, and sat rigid on the bench seat. My flashlight trembled in my grip. For long minutes, nothing happened. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I was falling into some sleep-deprived hallucination, but then the knocking returned. This time it wasn't playful. It came from the roof. 4 sharp knocks, then silence. Another 4 closer to the edge, as if someone or something were crawling across the roof. I held my breath, knuckles whitening around the flashlight. The knocks moved down to the door, then along the thin walls, circling. They weren't loud, but deliberate, patient. I wanted to scream, to shout, to make noise of my own, but fear held me tighter than silence ever could. I sat frozen, listening as the pattern circled and circled until, without warning, it stopped. Not faded, stopped as though cut off mid-strike. I waited. 5 minutes, 10, an hour. No sound, not even the night wind against the RV. The silence settled again, denser than ever, and I realized with horror that I'd begun to recognize it. It wasn't just absence. It was presence, a presence that fed on absence. By dawn, my decision was made. I couldn't stay another night. I loaded up as quickly as I could, securing cabinets, tying down loose gear. My hands shook as I shoved things into place, not caring if I broke something. I had to go. When I slid into the driver's seat, the key already in the ignition, I noticed something that nearly made me faint. Across the windshield, written in the dust, were words. Simple, childlike. Just 3. Stay with us. The letters were formed perfectly, too clean to be an accident. My chest locked, and I slammed the RV into drive. The tires spun gravel into the wash as I barreled down the dirt road, eyes flicking to the mirrors, half expecting to see shapes running after me. The farther I got, the more the silence eased. It wasn't instant, but gradual, like shedding a heavy coat you didn't know you were wearing. By the time I hit the highway, the world sounded normal again. Birds, wind, the whir of passing cars. I laughed out loud, a jagged, broken laugh, gripping the wheel until my hands ached. I was safe, or so I thought. I drove for hours without stopping, desperate to put miles between me and that cursed patch of BLM land. Finally, near Montrose, I pulled into a gas station, legs rubbery when I stepped out. The relief of hearing the hum of fluorescent lights overhead was almost overwhelming. I stood there, soaking it in, until the attendant gave me a strange look. "Long drive?" he asked. "Too long," I muttered, forcing a smile. But as I fueled up, something gnawed at me. The silence hadn't followed me, but it hadn't let go either. My ears buzzed faintly, as though they remembered it. And when I opened the RV door to grab my wallet, I noticed something else. The inside smelled wrong, not like propane or mildew or anything mechanical. It smelled stale, like a basement that had been sealed shut for decades. And on the bench seat where I'd sat in fear the night before, there was a faint outline, a human outline. Dust displaced, pressed into the cushion as though someone had sat there all night. Someone heavier than me. My hands shook as I backed out, slamming the door again. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't tell the cops. What would I say? That silence itself had followed me, that invisible squatters were writing messages on my RV. They'd lock me up for evaluation. So I did the only thing I knew. I drove again. But each night after, no matter where I stopped, something came with me. The silence would creep in slowly, stripping the sound from the world. Once in Utah, I camped on the edge of a canyon, and as the sun fell, I realized I couldn't hear the river below anymore. Another time, in Nevada, even the crickets failed to chirp after dark, the hush so heavy it crushed the air from my lungs. And always, there were signs. A window latch undone, a new phrase in the dust. You hear us now. By then, sleep was nearly impossible. I'd sit awake, lantern burning, whispering to myself just to break the suffocating quiet. My voice cracked from dryness, but I kept talking. About my day, about anything, about nothing. Because if I stopped, I swore I could hear them breathing. It took me weeks to accept the truth. The danger of boondocking isn't always rattlesnakes or broken axles or running out of water. Sometimes it's what you can't see, what you can't hear, what waits in the cracks between silence and sound. And once you've heard it or failed to hear it, it doesn't let you go. That spring, I thought I was running from a patch of haunted land. But the truth was simpler, crueler. The silence wasn't tied to a place. It was tied to me. I didn't tell anyone about it at first. How could I? People already think boondockers are half crazy for wanting to sleep alone in the middle of nowhere, without hookups, without neighbors, without safety nets. If I started rambling about silence that follows you, they'd chalk it up to isolation, paranoia, maybe too many beers around the fire. So I kept it in, carrying it like a sickness that had no name. But silence doesn't stay invisible forever. Eventually, others notice. It was in Moab when it happened. I'd pulled into a dispersed spot off Willow Springs Road, thinking maybe being around other rigs, even at a distance, would anchor me. I set up, kept to myself, and tried to breathe in the comfort of seeing faint lights down the road from other campers. It worked for a while. That night, I even heard laughter, faint, carried on the breeze, from a group gathered somewhere out of sight. That sound felt like medicine, but around midnight, it died. Not gradually like people settling into their beds, it just cut off mid-laughter. 1 second joy, the next, nothing. My chest tightened, and I knew. They hadn't gone quiet on their own. The silence had come. I lay rigid in my bunk, eyes open, staring at the ceiling while the world outside drained of life. No wind in the scrub. No crunch of gravel when someone shifted by their rig. Not even the creak of my own RV settling. I wanted to get up to look out the window to check if those distant rigs still burned their lights, but I couldn't. Because if I looked, I might see them standing there. The ones who had been riding in the dust. The next morning, I stumbled outside, hollow-eyed. I walked the short stretch of road where I'd seen the glow of other rigs. The campers were gone, every one of them. No tire tracks leading out, no footprints, just blank sand and dust, flat as though it had never been touched. It should have terrified me more than it did. Instead, I felt numb, like I'd been expecting it all along. That's the thing about carrying dread for too long. It doesn't shock you anymore. It just sinks deeper, settling into your bones. I left Moab behind and headed south. I kept telling myself I'd shake it if I just kept moving, if I never stayed long enough for the silence to settle in. But it didn't matter. Wherever I stopped, it followed. Sometimes when exhaustion finally dragged me into a shallow sleep, I'd dream of noise. Crowds, cities, street musicians, banging drums on buckets, children screaming at a county fair. In the dream, I'd weep with relief, only to wake up to silence thick as wool. I'd open the blinds, and sometimes there'd be a phrase written in the dust. We're closer now. Other times, there'd be nothing, but the stillness would have grown heavier, like an extra weight added to the air. I started testing it. At one campsite near a dry lake bed in Arizona, I kept my generator running all night. Its hum filled the air, vibrating through the RV walls, drowning everything else out. For the first 2 hours, it worked. I almost smiled, almost convinced myself the sound could protect me. But then the generator sputtered. Not out of gas, not mechanical failure, just sputtered and died. I checked it in the morning. It ran fine in daylight, but at night it would not stay alive. Another time, I left my phone blaring music. I turned the volume as high as it would go, filling the rig with guitar riffs, pounding drums, lyrics I knew by heart. And yet, around 2 in the morning, the sound dulled. Not cut off, dulled, as though someone had wrapped thick blankets around the speakers. I pressed my ear against them, but even then, the music felt miles away, muffled by an ocean of quiet. I began to realize it wasn't the absence of sound that frightened me most. It was the knowledge that something was controlling it, choosing it, making it so. The breaking point came in New Mexico. I'd parked along a lonely stretch near Chaco Canyon, the ruins dark silhouettes against a rising moon. I thought, maybe foolishly, that being near the remnants of ancient people might make me feel less alone. I cooked, ate, and crawled into bed, still gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. Sometime past midnight, I woke to the silence pressing harder than it ever had. My head throbbed as if the pressure itself were physical. And then I heard it. Not knocks this time, but voices. Faint, overlapping whispers, moving around the RV. Not words, not in any language I recognized, but steady, flowing, like dozens of people speaking just low enough that I couldn't make sense of them. I snapped. I leapt from the bed, flung open the door, and shouted into the night. "What do you want from me?" The voices stopped. For one heartbeat, the desert was perfectly still. Then, from somewhere deep in the ruins, I heard one word, clear as my own thoughts. Stay. The sound wasn't spoken out loud. It was inside me, vibrating in my skull. I staggered back, heart hammering, and slammed the RV door shut. I curled against it, whispering, "No, no, no, no." Tears ran down my face before I realized I was crying. By dawn, the word was still there, echoing. Not out loud, but burned into me. Stay. That was the first time I thought seriously about ending it. Selling the RV, quitting the road, crawling back to some apartment where the only noise was the upstairs neighbor's TV and the occasional honking car. Anything but this. But when I pictured it, trading the freedom of the road for 4 walls and the constant awareness that silence could slip through them too, I realized there was no safety left. It wasn't just the land anymore. It wasn't tied to the campsites. It was tied to me. Still, I tried. I drove into Santa Fe, parked outside a friend's townhouse, and convinced myself that being near other people would weaken it. I hadn't seen him in years, but when he opened the door, his smile faltered. "Man, you look awful," he said. "How long's it been since you slept?" "Too long," I admitted. He let me crash on his couch. That night, with the hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the faint traffic sounds outside, I thought maybe it was gone. I drifted off for the first time in weeks. But then my friend shook me awake in the middle of the night, his face pale. "Why are you standing over me?" he whispered. I blinked at him, confused, because I was still lying on the couch. But he swore he'd seen me, or something shaped like me, standing in his doorway, perfectly still, breathing too quietly to be real. He wouldn't let me stay another night, and I couldn't blame him. Driving away the next morning, I realized the silence wasn't just following me anymore. It was becoming me. By the time I crossed into Texas, the silence wasn't just an intruder anymore. It was a companion, a malignant shadow that learned how to walk in step with me. I began noticing it not just in the wilderness, but in gas stations, in grocery store parking lots, even in towns where life pulsed with noise. The hum of neon, the chatter of strangers, the rumble of engines, they were all there, yet somehow I could sense a space around me where sound refused to exist, a bubble of absence. People noticed, though they didn't understand it. Once in a diner outside Amarillo, the waitress set down my plate and frowned. "Funny," she said. "I swear I heard the jukebox cut out just now. Like somebody turned the volume down when I walked by your booth." She laughed nervously, but her eyes lingered on me longer than they should have. I laughed it off too, but inside I was trembling. It wasn't just my ears anymore. The silence was radiating outward, changing the world for others, making itself known. Nights were worse. I'd crawl into my bunk and feel it coil around me, not with the pressure of fear anymore, but with intimacy, like it was waiting for me to stop resisting, to accept it. And sometimes, half asleep, I'd hear it whispering, not words, but impressions, suggestions, the promise of stillness without fear, the promise of never being alone again. I told myself I wasn't going crazy. I tried to document it, writing notes in a journal, recording voice memos on my phone, but when I played them back, there was nothing. Just a hiss of static, then silence. Not even my own voice. The breaking point came one night along a lonely stretch outside Lubbock. I'd parked in a pull-off, bone-tired after 12 hours of driving. The sky was wide and star-pierced, and I thought maybe, just maybe, exhaustion would keep me from noticing. But as soon as I killed the engine, the silence rushed in like a tide. I sat in the driver's seat, refusing to move, gripping the wheel as though it could anchor me. That's when I saw movement in the side mirror. At first, I thought it was just my own reflection, but it wasn't. My reflection blinked, leaned closer, and smiled. And I swear to God I hadn't smiled. I scrambled out of the cab, heart in my throat, and circled to the side of the RV. Nothing there, only dust shifting under the stars. But when I climbed back inside, I knew. The silence wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the RV, inside me. I didn't sleep that night or the next. My reflection grew stranger each time I glanced at it. A fraction too still, a second too late to mimic me. I stopped looking in mirrors altogether. And then, one morning, I woke to find words etched into the condensation of my windshield. Not childlike this time, but careful, deliberate. Why fight what you are? I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own boots, and it hit me with the force of a freight train. The silence wasn't just feeding on me, it was reshaping me. I wasn't its victim, I was its vessel. The thought tore something loose in me. For weeks, maybe months, I've been clinging to the belief that I could outrun it, outdrive it, drown it out with noise. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. You can't run from something once it's inside you. I began avoiding people altogether. Not just for their safety, but because I couldn't bear to see their confusion when the air dulled around me, when the laughter in a room faltered as soon as I entered. It was easier to keep moving, slipping from one patch of land to another, living like a ghost in my own life. But you can't live on the run forever. The silence knew that. And it began testing me, pushing me closer to the edge. One night, somewhere deep in the hill country, I was jolted awake by the sound of a knock, this time from inside the RV. My stomach dropped. Slowly, I turned my head toward the kitchenette. The cupboard door rattled once, then stopped. Then another knock, this time from the bathroom. Then another, closer, against the very wall of my bunk. I pressed my hands over my ears, shaking, whispering, "No, no, no." But it didn't matter. The sound wasn't sound anymore. It was inside me, vibrating in my bones. And then a voice, not outside, not in my head, but both at once. "You belong to us now," I screamed, or thought I did. My throat strained, my mouth opened, but no sound came out. Nothing. The silence had stolen even that. I don't know how long I lay there, thrashing in mute terror before exhaustion crushed me down. When morning came, I stumbled outside into the pale dawn, desperate for proof it hadn't been real. But there it was, carved into the dirt at my feet, a perfect circle of footprints surrounding my RV. Bare feet pressed deep into the earth, all facing inward. I collapsed to my knees, staring at them, and the realization hit me like cold steel. The silence wasn't trying to drive me mad. It was trying to make me one of them. After the footprints, everything shifted. I stopped trying to explain it away. No more generator tests, no more loud playlists. I started carrying a journal like a talisman, scratching down observations in a cramped, hurried hand as if writing things down might anchor them in ink and keep them from slipping away. I dated each entry. I tried to mark time around the only thing that still felt tethered to reality, numbers. But the silence doesn't respect calendars. It respects bodies and attention and the small, private rituals you use to prove you exist. The first real surrender came in the form of a tune, not mine. It began as a memory, an earworm of a melody I'd heard as a kid. My mother humming in the kitchen while she stirred a pot, slow and tuneless at first, then picking out a line like a pebble from water. It sat in my chest like a coin you keep worrying, feeling its edge until it polishes into shape. I tried to hum it, low and rough, to test whether sound still belonged to me. The note shivered out of my throat and felt thin, frayed like an old rope. Still, it was sound. It was proof. That night, I sang until my voice felt raw. I sang until the dryness in my mouth felt like a foreign country. I kept humming over and over, looping the melody, listening to it echo against the cabinet faces, waiting to see if the silence would swallow it whole. Hours passed, my throat burned, the stars leaked cold light through the windows, and then, around 2 a.m, a new sound answered me. It wasn't a knock or a whisper. It was a chorus of breaths, synchronized, like an audience finally breathing in after being held underwater. The hair along my arms rose. The breath moved around the RV, circling the rig like wind through stacked old paper. My heartbeat thudded in time, and for one impossible second I felt less alone. Maybe they were listeners, I thought. Creatures who only wanted to hear. I sang louder. The breaths came closer, then pressed to the door. My ribs felt like a drum being gently tapped. The sound shaped itself into a cadence, patient and expectant. Then a voice, soft as if spoken right next to my ear, spoke a single sentence. "We knew you could sing." It was not malicious. Not at first. There was something weary in it, like an old neighbor calling from across a fence. Relief and terror wrestled in me. I laughed, high and broken. "Who are you?" I croaked. Silence is slippery around names. It rejects identity like a rough stone from a magnet. The voice replied with something else. Not a name, but images pressed into my mind. Faces I'd seen in passing at rest stops, the soft geometry of someone's hands over a steering wheel, a child in a car seat sleeping, a dog's ear folded in sleep. It fed me glimpses, as if to say, we were once ordinary. We are ordinary now. I should have run then. Should have revved the engine, thrown the rig into reverse, and never looked in the mirror again. But something else had already begun. Pity. Not pity for them. No, I felt pity for myself, for the smallness of my stubborn fight. They were patient. They sounded like something that had been waiting for decades for someone to finally listen. Over the next days, the voice became more conversational, offering scraps of memory and comfort. It told me about roads that bent back on themselves, about truckers who stopped answering their radios, about kids who slipped off a path and never returned. It framed it like a natural order, like a rebalancing. We make the world still, it would say. We give it rest. The cadence was almost persuasive, and I found myself arguing back, not out of defiance, but from a strange desire to be understood. I don't want to be part of your silence, I told it. I want to keep my life. Your life was noise, it said once gently. We simply make room. The stakes rose quickly. Where once I'd been unable to hear birds or rivers, now small appliances conked out in deliberate timing. My compass spun for a week like a toy gone mad. I stopped trusting my tools entirely. More unsettling were the changes in me. I woke with the faint impression of another face hovering just over my pillow, a presence that smelled like dust and unburned candles. The reflection in the oven glass sometimes lagged a second behind my movements. Once in a rest area bathroom, I watched my mouth form a shape I hadn't meant to make, and for a split second saw the shape translate to a different set of lips, older, thinner, smiling not quite with warmth. And then there were the dreams, which became prescient in a way that hurt. In the dreams, I stood on top of a mesa surrounded by barefoot footprints forming concentric rings. A voice told me to step into the circle and be still. In the dream, I refused. The dream tightened like a noose until I woke up in the middle of my own scream, no sound at all, but with the heaviness of that refusal lodged behind my sternum. When I checked the dirt outside, sometimes there were new prints. Sometimes there weren't. Once, in an act that felt more like bargaining than plan, I drove to a cemetery on the outskirts of Midland. I didn't know why I thought it would help. The dead are noisy in their own quiet ways, full of voices stuck in the ground. Maybe if I asked the living to step in to shout or play music, the silence would flinch. I brought a small battery-powered radio and tuned it to a country station, the twang of a steel guitar filling the air. For an hour, the world was loud. My shoulders finally unknotted. I listened to a DJ talk about a flood in 2006 and felt like a child again, not yet corroded by the long quiet. Then a slow, low rumble rolled through the cemetery and the radio dropped to a whisper. The DJ's words slurred, the music stretched thin like taffy. The speakers breathed, and then the sound crumpled into nothing. I felt stupid, like a man who'd tried to plug a leak with his fingers and failed. From the grass, something scraped, like 100 small stones being pulled across each other. I turned and saw a small group of birds cock their heads, eyes fixed on me. They didn't fly. They didn't move. It was absurd and the most horrific thing I'd seen. Life paused to watch. When I got back to the rig, I found a note tucked under the windshield wiper, not written in dust this time, but on a scrap of paper printed in a neat, indifferent font. You keep us alive when you resist. Stop. That line, simple, bureaucratic, was the worst form of cruelty. It implied choice, and choice implied guilt. The silence wasn't merely a force. It was a moral arbiter, telling me that my fight kept their condition sharp. I slept with my head to my knees for 3 nights. I muttered to the empty air to hear the sound of my own voice. I slapped my own arms until the sting grounded me in skin. The tipping point came when I realized I no longer recognized which thoughts were mine. Some mornings I'd wake knowing facts I couldn't have learned, names whispered in the dark, coordinates for roads I'd never traveled. I'd find small acts performed while I'd been half asleep. A cairn of stones rearranged, a flashlight placed deliberately on a seat, the propane turned just a quarter open. Once, I found long, ukulele-like scratches along the inside wall of a storage compartment, rhythms that weren't human. I began leaving cameras running overnight. The footage would show me, sleepless, pacing with a dazed look, hands sometimes raised as if conducting an invisible orchestra. In some clips, my mouth moved in a slow, intimate conversation with the space itself. I tried to resist harder. I drove to a busy Walmart, parked in the lot under sodium lights, buzzing with indignation, and sat in the car until my eyes watered. People streamed in and out, noisy and oblivious, refrigerators humming and carts squeaking. I felt for a while like I hadn't since the first days on the road. But when I went inside, pushing a cart down an aisle with other shoppers, I felt a pressure swell behind my teeth, an urge to stop, to listen, to fold into the aisle and stop moving. I realized with sick clarity, the silence hadn't just made room. It wanted inhabitants it could mold. What if becoming one of them is the only way to keep them from hurting others? I whispered to myself once, the thought a stone in my mouth. It was a question that smelled like surrender, because it was. I grabbed a bag of crackers, shoved them into my cart as if hoarding crumbs could delay a verdict, and left the store with a receipt that felt like a contract. But I still had a stubborn flicker of me left, enough to write these words on paper, to tell this story. Enough to keep a lighter in my pocket and click it open every night until the flame trembled, then tamped it out, refusing to let it go out of habit. The lighter's brief flare was a protest, a small litosis against the long, patient dark. Holding it felt like holding a pulse. And then, slowly, the silence started answering back, not with commands, but with offers. A whisper of release, the promise that if I gave up the fight, I would never again have to bear the weight of watching others disappear. If I agreed to be still, really still, my consciousness would expand, they promised, to other quiet places, to the hush behind the ages. I would belong to a different kind of family. I told myself these were lies. I told myself that no entity, no matter how patient, deserved surrender. But lying was easier than taking the next step to prove it. It felt like standing at a crossroads that had no map. The offers came soft, like all the best traps do, soft enough to make you think you were choosing for yourself. Give us the quiet, they whispered in the small hours, and we will give you meaning. You will never watch someone vanish again. I imagined what that meant. A life without the jagged edges of fear, without the lonely electric buzz of running a rig through empty night. A warmth of belonging that sounded intoxicating after months of being hunted by absence. The problem was the price was a surrender of self, subtle at first and then wholesale. The silence didn't demand violence. It wanted compliance. It wanted to fold me into its pattern until my memory of sound was as distant as a dream. I parked on a ridge one evening outside of Odessa, the world beneath me cut in half by the highway's orange smear. I needed to decide. Staying meant letting the thing in. Leaving meant living with an enemy that would keep trying. I paced the little deck outside my RV until my boots were dusty and my throat raw from talking aloud, explaining, bargaining, pleading with myself the way you do when you're trying to hold a collapsing house together from the inside. I held conversations with the void, with that soft chorus that answered when I hummed. It promised safety. It promised expansion. It promised an end to the small deaths I'd watched, rigs gone, laughter snuffed, friends' faces blank on a road that refused to remember them. But promises mean nothing if you have the taste of your own voice left in your mouth. I decided, stupidly brave or stubbornly foolish, that I would find another way. If the silence fed on absence, then I would refuse to be absent. I would make myself impossible to mute. The plan was embarrassingly simple. I borrowed a battery-powered megaphone from a fellow boondocker who owed me a favor. I drove to the center of a wide, empty playa where sound could travel. I set the megaphone on a tripod, cued my phone to play a looped recording of a radio host's rant, fast, angry, human, and I hit record on the dash cam. Then, heart pounding so hard my ribs hurt, I stepped back, raised my own voice, and screamed into the night. Not a whisper, not a hymn. A raw, ragged scream that was part challenge, part plea. The first thing that happened was immediate. The air around me shuddered. The recorded rant rasped and then thinned out as if someone had dragged their hand through the atmosphere. But my scream kept going. It tore like a live wire through the hush, a bright, terrible thing. For a moment I felt triumphant, like a man who'd lit a flare in a black ocean. Then the response came, but not as I expected. They didn't come as shadows or as knocks. They came as attention. The silence leaned in and listened. I felt it like a pressure behind my sternum, and in the space of that pressure I saw flecks of light along the horizon. Distant headlights, faraway rigs coalescing like moths drawn to a bonfire. The megaphone's shrillness had carried farther than I thought. People were waking up, stepping out into the dark, puzzled by a lone figure screaming into nothing. I ran toward the rigs, toward the clink of human movement. My breath tore in and out. The world felt unbearably loud for the first time in months. As I staggered from one circle of lamps to the next, I shouted explanations. Listen, there's something. But each group's puzzled expressions turned to alarm as the silence, my long enemy, thinned around them in strange, immediate ways. Radios stuttered back to life. Dogs barked and then halted, heads cocked. The jukebox in a distant trailer coughed and then whimpered into static, as though the silence was irritated and resisting. At the nearest rig, an older couple stood holding hands, faces creased with sleep. They listened to me, their eyes wet with confusion, and then their faces softened, almost pitying. "You poor thing," the woman said. "You look like you've been through hell." I wanted to explain everything in one breath. The footsteps, the dust words, the way my reflection looked like someone else, but the words dissolved in my mouth. Instead, I told the truth in the only way I knew how. I asked them to listen. I told them to make the loudest noise they could. The husband fumbled with a set of pots and banged them together like a frantic percussionist until their metal rang bright across the plain. The woman revved a small generator. Music spilled out, clumsy and human, and for a breathless minute, the world hummed. The silence recoiled as though slapped. Then something else happened. The sky dimmed, not like clouds rolling in, but like a hand passing slowly over the sun. The air chilled. The dog stopped barking. The couple's faces slackened into something empty and patient. The generator stuttered not from lack of fuel, but from some invisible hand squeezing the life out of the sound. The man's hand fell from the pot, slowly. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, a softness edged with resignation, and then he turned, walked barefoot across the playa toward a ring of footsteps that had not been there a minute before, leaving behind his wife and the dying song of the generator. "Don't go," I shouted, lunging forward, but my legs were leaden and the distance between us expanded like a slow accretion of fog. The woman screamed, a raw sound that tore at my throat, but then, rippling outward, silence fell over her too. She stood rooted, eyes glazed, as the man reached the circle and stepped into it. The footprints swallowed him like a mouth closing. He lowered his head as if in prayer, and then he was gone. No dust, no scattering footsteps, just the image of him folded into the stillness. Everything after that happened in a blur. People I'd roused began to look at each other with a dawning, terrible comprehension, as if the world were a puzzle and now they could see the missing piece. Some fled in their trucks, engines screaming to life, lights blinding in frantic spatter. Others stood and cried, and then, with the same patient resignation, walked toward whatever the silence had becoming, toward the circles, toward the empty places between stars. A baby began to wail, a sound so pure it cut clean through the hush, and for a moment I felt like I'd broken something. Then the baby's cry weakened into a gurgle and stopped. A stroller sat empty, the blanket folded neatly. I ran until my lungs were fire, and then until my legs wouldn't obey. I kept thinking, ridiculous, desperate, that if I could get to the highway, to a place of noise and people and distance, the spell would break. I hit the asphalt with the megaphone still clutched in my hands and screamed until my voice vanished into a hoarse, rasping nothing. The dash cam caught it all. My running, the circling footprints, the rigs clustered like a colony of stunned insects, the people walking into the quiet one by one. Later, when I watched the footage with trembling fingers, there were gaps, brief frames missing, as if someone had cut film out of my life. In their place was a smooth, silent smear. I don't know when the last of them went. I don't know if all who left did so willingly, or if the silence simply took advantage of weariness and longing and the human hunger for belonging. I know only that, at dawn, the plane lay empty, as if a party had suddenly been canceled, and everyone simply decided to go home. Except they hadn't gone home. They had become part of it. I think of that couple often. I think of the woman's hands, small and trembling, the way she reached for me and then let go. I wonder if for an instant as she walked, she remembered the sound of her husband's laugh, the smell of coffee in the morning. I hope she did. I fear she didn't. I sat on the curb for hours, the megaphone dead at my feet, the lighter cool in my palm. The silence had not consumed me that night, nor had it left. It had learned. It had shown me its method. It did not shatter you. It waited until you handed yourself over. The more you fought, the more perfect its patience. When the sun rose hot and hard over the highway, I realized something else. Noise would stop being a refuge. If what the silence wanted was inhabitants, patient, receptive, then anyone I woke might become a new vessel. My screaming had been a double-edged sword. I had woken people up, yes, but I had also given them a chance to be drawn in. My act of defiance had endangered others. I slid the megaphone into the RV, closed the door, and sat until my knees went numb. The road ahead felt less like escape and more like a trial. I could keep running, making noise and increasingly desperate attempts to anchor myself, or I could try to find a way to exercise what was inside me without pulling anyone else down. Either choice felt like damned work. In the end, I drove away, not as victory, but as penance. I drove and I talked into the phone, recording whatever I could, the sound of my own breath, my own name, the names of places and faces I loved, in case the day came when even memory was threatened. I told myself that whatever I did next had to be measured, careful, not to wake crowds, not to blare alarms, quiet acts of preservation, little charms against the long, patient hush. But even as I drove, I knew the truth. The silence learned from everything I did. It adapted. It waited. And somewhere, on a patch of land under a cold sky, rings of footprints remained, patient and neat as a hidden calendar, waiting for the next soul who would not notice the price. The highway became my confessional. Every mile marker passed was another verse in a story I didn't know how to stop telling. I talked out loud constantly. Names of exits, billboards I saw, thoughts about the weather, scraps of songs I half remembered, anything to keep the silence from reclaiming me. If I paused too long, even to take a sip of water, I'd feel it stir. That press in my chest, that prickle along my scalp, the stillness hungry to slide back into the cracks. I learned quickly that it wanted pauses. It wanted gaps. And in the strangest way, it began shaping my speech. I'd find myself avoiding silence like a man who avoids potholes on a dark road, talking without breathing, filling the air with nonsense just so I didn't leave it an opening. I stopped listening to music because, even between tracks, when the second of silence arrived, I felt it lean close like a breath on my ear. There's something degrading about being afraid of nothing. I knew how to handle storms, wild animals, even the thought of a break-in on the road. But nothing. How do you lock your doors against a void? How do you explain to people that your greatest predator is the pause between their words? In Dallas, I tried to see a doctor. I thought maybe a medical professional would find something. Tinnitus, auditory hallucinations, some neurological glitch. I sat in the clinic waiting room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, other patients scrolling their phones or coughing into tissues. For 20 minutes, the world seemed normal. Then my name was called. When the nurse guided me back to the exam room, the first thing I noticed was the hum of the air conditioner. Steady, low, comforting. I focused on it like a child clutching a blanket. The nurse asked a few questions, and I began to explain. Trouble with silence, hearing things, maybe losing my mind. She smiled politely, typing notes. Then the air conditioner clicked off. The pause was less than a second, but in that fraction, my stomach dropped. The nurse's typing slowed. She frowned at the computer, then at me, her lips moving as if she'd said something, but no sound reached me. I leaned forward, panic spiking. "What did you say?" I demanded. She blinked, startled. "I didn't." Then she froze, eyes widening. Her mouth moved again, shaping words I couldn't hear. I felt the silence pressing in, the familiar weight squeezing into the small room. She grabbed her stethoscope as if it might help, but her hands shook. Finally, she fled, mumbling something about needing the doctor. I sat alone in that room for 15 long minutes. The silence grew so heavy the fluorescent light above me seemed to flicker in time with my pulse. When the doctor arrived, his face was pale, his smile forced. He said something. His lips moved, but again, nothing reached me. Nothing except the familiar, patient whisper inside. "Stop resisting." I bolted. Out of the room, down the hallway, through the lobby. People turned as I burst outside into the Texas heat, gasping like I'd been underwater too long. I jumped into my RV, slammed the door, and roared onto the street without looking back. That was the last time I tried to ask for help. After that, I avoided towns. The silence had shown me it wasn't bound to empty places. It could reach into crowded rooms, bend the edges of other people's reality until they too fell quiet. If it wanted to consume me, fine. But I wouldn't let it consume them. So I drove into the loneliest places I could find. Desert flats, mountain pull-offs, forgotten forest roads. And there, I waited. The waiting became ritual. Every evening, I built a fire, even if I didn't need the warmth. The crackle, faint as it was, helped me feel like I was pushing back. I kept the lighter in my pocket at all times, a little promise of noise, and each night I felt the silence circle. Sometimes it knocked, sometimes it whispered, sometimes it only sat there, heavy and patient, like a predator watching me from tall grass. But one night in the Panhandle, the ritual failed. I lit the fire, sat with my journal, and began to hum that tune from my childhood again. At first, it steadied me. Then, faintly, I heard something join in, not a breath, not a knock, a voice. Low, cracked, humming the same tune in perfect unison with me. I froze. My throat closed, but the humming continued without me. I scrambled inside the RV, slammed the door, and pressed my back against it. The hum followed, vibrating through the thin walls surrounding me. For the first time, I realized what they wanted wasn't just stillness. They wanted imitation. They wanted to inhabit me so fully that they could use my sounds as their own. I clutched the journal, desperate, and wrote one sentence over and over until my hand cramped. I am not them. I filled 4 pages with it, the ink smudging under my sweaty palm. And when I finally stopped, I realized I couldn't hear my own heartbeat anymore. The silence had stolen even that. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually exhaustion dragged me under. I dreamed of standing in a field surrounded by hundreds of barefoot figures. Their faces were blurred, but each one hummed my childhood tune in perfect harmony. When I tried to scream, the sound came out as their song instead. I woke with tears streaming down my face and the journal still clutched in my hand. In the margin, in a handwriting that wasn't mine, 3 words had been added: join the choir. That was the moment I knew the end game. They weren't content to haunt me. They wanted to recruit me. They wanted me to become a voice in their endless harmony, a vessel of their stillness, a walking invitation for others. And the truth, a part of me was tempted. After months of terror, the idea of giving up, of resting, of dissolving into something larger, it had an allure. But temptation is just another weapon, and I wasn't ready to be theirs. Not yet. I drove east toward the thick forests of Arkansas as if trees could shield me, as if their canopy could muffle what hunted me. I told myself I had one last task before I decided anything, one last thing to try. I would find someone who had heard them before, someone else who had survived, because if they were real, and I knew in my marrow they were, then I couldn't be the first. And if I wasn't the first, maybe there was still a way to fight. I drove east with the desperation of a man chasing his own shadow. Every mile felt like a wager. If I could just find proof, some scrap of another story like mine, maybe I could shove this nightmare into a shape I could fight. The silence still rode with me, always pressing at the edges, but I clung to the thin thread of purpose. Purpose is noisy. It keeps the void at bay. In Arkansas, I parked in a small-town library lot, the kind of place that smelled of old paper and lemon cleaner, with faded murals of pioneers painted on the walls. I slipped inside, shoulders hunched, aware of how strange I must have looked, sunburned, eyes bloodshot, clothes smelling of campfire and dust. The librarian, an older man with thinning hair, gave me a cautious nod but asked no questions. That silence felt merciful, the human kind, not the other. I dove into microfilm archives and newspaper stacks, scrolling through decades of headlines: local man missing near Ozark Trail, family disappears during weekend outing, unexplained vanishings plague remote campgrounds. Most were explained away: lost hikers, accidents, tragedies of the wild, but some left gaps. Stories of campers whose gear was found intact, fires still burning, food half-eaten but no sign of them. No tracks, no struggle, no noise. The pattern was everywhere if you looked. BLM land in Colorado, deserts in Nevada, forests in Oregon. Vanishings that carried the same fingerprints. Abrupt, bloodless, soundless. I scribbled notes in my journal, connecting them with frantic lines, feeling like I'd uncovered a map no one wanted to admit existed. One article stopped me cold, from 1987. A woman named Sarah Mitchell, 33, vanished while boondocking with her husband near the Ouachita Mountains. He claimed she stepped out of the RV for air and never came back. Search parties found nothing. The article quoted him once, buried at the bottom. "It got too quiet," he said. I told them that, but nobody believed me. It just got too quiet. I copied his name into my journal and underlined it 3 times. Proof. Someone else had felt it. Someone else had known. But Sarah's husband had died in the 90s, according to an obituary I dug up. Still, that single line cracked the shell of my solitude. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the only one. That night, I slept in the library lot, the RV wedged under a flickering streetlight. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. Not safety, but solidarity, however faint. When the silence came, it always came, I clutched the journal to my chest like a shield. "You didn't take him," I whispered to the void. "He told the truth, and now I will too." The next day, I pushed deeper. I started reaching out, calling small-town sheriffs, scanning message boards on weak Wi-Fi, following threads that smelled of paranoia but carried slivers of truth. A retired ranger in Utah who muttered about vanishing zones. A trucker in Arizona who swore his CB went dead every time he passed a certain canyon. A widow in Oregon who refused to camp again because, as she said, the trees don't breathe out there. Each story was fractured, half hidden under embarrassment or disbelief, but each one hummed with the same undertone. Silence as predator. Silence that consumes. The more I gathered, the more I understood why it was never public. Who would believe a force you can't see, can't measure, can't photograph? People want monsters they can stab, tracks they can follow, reasons they can rationalize. But the silence, God the silence, it doesn't play by those rules. It waits, patient, until you explain yourself away. As I drove between towns, I began noticing something unsettling. My own story was bleeding into theirs. The phrases I read echoed back at me in the night. It got too quiet. The trees don't breathe. Once, I swear I heard Sarah's husband's voice, ragged and low, whispering from the back of my RV, "You understand now." I spun, flashlight beam cutting through empty air, but nothing was there. Nothing except the heavy quiet pressing approval into my bones. By then, the journal had become more than a record. It was an anchor, proof of continuity. But even that wasn't safe. Some mornings I woke to find lines written in it that I didn't remember writing, sentences that weren't mine. "We wait with you. Noise is a wound you keep reopening." The handwriting mimicked mine perfectly, and that terrified me more than any knock on the wall. If it could use my voice, my hand, what stopped it from using all of me? One night, in a Walmart lot outside Little Rock, I tested it. I left the journal open on the table, pen resting across the spine, and I sat watching it, eyes burning, determined not to blink. Hours passed. My vision blurred. My head nodded. When I snapped awake, the pen had moved. 2 words stared up at me. "Welcome home." I slammed the book shut, heart pounding. I wanted to throw it out the window, to burn it, to sever whatever tether it had become. But I couldn't. Because it was the only proof I had that I wasn't alone. That contradiction, wanting to destroy it, needing to keep it, ate at me as I drove deeper into the woods. The silence felt pleased, if silence can feel anything. It grew heavier each night, but less hostile, as if my collecting of stories was exactly what it wanted, as if by naming its work I was consecrating it. The deeper truth hit me on a forest road lined with cypress. The silence wasn't hunting me anymore. It was grooming me, teaching me, preparing me. And the question I couldn't shake was this: preparing me for what? The silence was no longer content to lurk in the margins of my nights. It began shaping the days too, bending the world to its rhythm. In diners, I noticed forks clatter a half-second late, like the world buffering. Conversations near me faltered, people forgetting mid-sentence what they'd been saying. Once at a gas station outside Hot Springs, the pump froze at $6.66. The numbers locked, the machine groaning into a hush so deep it felt like the whole parking lot had stopped breathing. The attendant stared at me like I'd cursed the place. And the strangest part? I wasn't afraid anymore. Not in the same way. The terror that once left me sleepless had curdled into something else. An awareness, sharp and sober, that maybe I wasn't meant to fight it at all. Maybe I was meant to carry it. It hit me one dusk on a gravel road deep in the Ouachitas. The trees crowded close, their trunks black against a fading violet sky. I parked the RV in a clearing, cut the engine, and just listened. Nothing. Nothing. No cicadas, no owls, not even the wind through the branches. The hush wrapped around me like a blanket, and for the first time I didn't resist. I opened the door and stepped outside, barefoot, feeling the gravel bite into my skin. The air was thick with expectation. My chest rose and fell, my breath the only proof of life. Then, faint and deliberate, came the sound of footsteps. Not many, just one pair. They circled me slowly, crunching in the gravel, though nothing stirred the dust. I didn't turn. I didn't shout. I simply whispered, "What do you want me to do?" The footsteps stopped, and in their place came the low, familiar hum. My song, my mother's tune, carried back to me not from one voice, but from dozens. The trees themselves seemed to vibrate with it. My knees weakened. I sank to the ground, palms pressed against the earth, tears spilling hot down my face. It wasn't threatening. It was pleading, inviting. For the first time, I understood what they were shaping me into. A witness, a messenger, someone who could speak their silence into the world of noise, someone who could prepare others, coax them, ease them into the quiet. The thought sickened me, but it also fit. Every step I'd taken since Gunnison had led here, every night without sound, every word in the dust, every phrase written in my journal, all of it was training, conditioning. I stumbled back into the RV, slammed the door, and collapsed onto the floor, rocking like a child. "No," I muttered. "I won't. I won't." But even as I said it, I felt the hollowness of the refusal. The silence wasn't asking. It was patient enough to wait. That night, I dreamed of a vast plain under a blood-red moon. Thousands of barefoot figures stood in perfect rows, all facing me. Their faces were blurred, but their posture was the same, still waiting. And when I opened my mouth to speak, no words came, only silence. The rows leaned forward as if drinking it in. When I woke, my journal lay open on the table. In my own handwriting, though I hadn't touched a pen, a new sentence sprawled across the page. "You will help them listen." I slammed the book shut, but the words burned in my skull long after. The following days blurred together. I drove, camped, wrote, and tried to resist the growing compulsion to stop strangers, to tell them about the hush. Once, at a rest stop, I nearly did. A young couple was unloading their cooler, laughing, their child chasing a ball across the asphalt. The sound of their joy was almost unbearable in its brightness. I opened my mouth to warn them, but instead, what rose up my throat was the hum, my mother's tune, steady and low. The child stopped playing. He turned his head toward me, eyes wide as if he recognized it. I bit down hard on my tongue, choking the sound back, and fled before I could see his parents' confusion. That night, I sat by my fire with blood drying on my lips and realized something vital. The silence wasn't preparing me to recruit. It was preparing me to signal. A carrier wave, a frequency that others could tune into. My hum wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs. The next morning, the journal confirmed it. Scrawled across the margins of my frantic notes were words I hadn't written. "The choir grows louder. You are the bridge. Noise was always the lie." I hurled the book into the fire. The pages curled, blackened, and then snuffed out without flame, as though the silence reached up and pinched it dead. When I pulled the ruined thing from the coals, the words were gone, but the paper wasn't burned. Just blank, erased. I wanted to scream, to make a sound so jagged it would tear open the sky, but I couldn't. My throat closed on me, and all that escaped was the beginning of that cursed hum. I don't know how much longer I can resist. Every day, I feel the boundary blurring between me and them, between noise and stillness. I talk less now, not because I've given up, but because my words don't always feel like mine. Sometimes they come out slower, heavier, as if carried by someone else's breath. I tell myself I'm writing this as a warning, but the truth gnaws at me. Maybe it's not a warning at all. Maybe it's the first chapter of their scripture. Maybe I'm already doing what they wanted, turning silence into story, spreading it like seed. And if you're listening to this, if my voice has reached you, then you have to ask yourself the question I can no longer avoid. When the silence comes for you, and it will you resist or will you listen? The road into Tennessee stretched ahead of me like a ribbon cut into shadow. I hadn't planned to drive east, but the wheel seemed to turn without asking me. That's how it felt most days now, like the silence wasn't just shaping my nights, but steering me in daylight too. My hands belonged to me, yet they didn't. My voice belonged to me, yet it hummed their tune when I least expected it. I told myself I was still fighting. I repeated the words over and over like a soldier muttering a battle hymn. I am not them. I am not them. But each mile, each hour, the conviction thinned, frayed like rope tugged too long against a rock. One evening, I pulled off into a wide clearing off the Natchez Trace Parkway. The sun sank slow, draping the trees in a honeyed glow. It should have been beautiful. But the moment my tires crunched to a stop, I knew I wasn't alone. The air was thick, charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm when every hair on your arm stands up. I lit a fire, but the wood barely crackled. It smoked instead, curling upward into shapes I didn't want to recognize. I sat in my camp chair, lighter tight in my palm, whispering my mantra under my breath. I am not them. I am not them. That was when I heard it. Not humming this time. Not whispers. A voice, clear and perfect, rising from the dark, and the voice was mine. Daniel, it called, warm as an old friend. Daniel, you're so tired. My blood iced. It wasn't echo, wasn't hallucination. It was my own voice, but smoother, unbroken by fear. Confident, patient, a version of me I'd long since abandoned. Come sit with us, it said. You don't need to run anymore. I stood so fast my chair toppled. My legs trembled, my lighter shaking in my grip. I'm not you, I rasped. You already are. It answered. And then, stepping into the edge of the firelight, I saw it. Myself. Same height, same build, same lined face, but with eyes that reflected nothing. They weren't empty. They were still. A stillness deeper than any silence I'd ever endured. It tilted its head, smiling gently. Noise is suffering, Daniel. We've been teaching you to let go. Don't you feel the weight lift when you stop resisting? I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My double didn't advance. He didn't need to. He just stood there, humming softly, and I realized the trees behind him were filled with figures. Dozens. Blurred faces, bare feet, still bodies. They weren't pressing forward. They were waiting. Patient, always patient. The air around me thickened until breathing hurt. My lighter clicked open. A flame flared, small but defiant. You can't have me, I whispered. The other Daniel smiled wider. We already do. I don't know what came over me then. Rage, terror, maybe the last spark of myself. I lunged forward, shouting, a real shout, raw and jagged, the kind that tears your throat bloody. The flame in my lighter jumped as if fueled by my defiance, flaring higher than it should have. For one impossible second, the figures flinched, the stillness wavered, the forest breathed, and then the flame died. The silence crashed back, harder than ever, and I dropped to my knees, chest heaving. My double crouched in front of me now, tilting his head with something like pity. You fought long, he murmured, but even a scream is just noise, and noise always fades. The figures closed in, slow, deliberate, forming their familiar circle around my RV. I thought of Gunnison, of the footprints in the wash, of how far I'd come. Every road had led me here, to this circle, to this choice. I pressed the dead lighter against my palm until the metal burned cold. And in that moment, I understood something sharp and cruel. Escape wasn't about outrunning them. It was about outlasting myself. With the last strength I had, I dragged in a breath and began to hum. Not their tune, mine. Broken, off-key, ugly. The kind of hum that carries the grit of human imperfection. My voice cracked, wavered, but I forced it out, louder and louder, until my throat tore. The figures tilted their heads. My double smile faltered. The forest shook, not with noise, but with something rawer, something alive. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd won. That maybe defiance didn't need to be perfect, just human. Then everything went black. When I woke, it was dawn. The fire was ash. My RV sat untouched. No footprints marked the dirt. My lighter lay beside me, cool and ordinary. And the silence, it was gone. At least that's what I told myself. The birds were singing. The wind sighed through the trees. My chest rose and fell with the rhythm of breath I could hear again. Relief hit me so hard I sobbed into my hands. But when I stumbled into the RV and looked at the journal on the table, my heart froze. On the last page, written in my hand but not my memory, were 3 words, "We are waiting." I drove without stopping. I don't remember packing camp, don't remember turning the ignition, don't even remember pulling onto the highway. All I know is that I kept the pedal pressed down and the hum of the tires beneath me felt like salvation. The world outside looked ordinary again, trees swaying, birds cutting across the morning sky, but ordinary had lost its meaning. Hours bled into each other. Every time I glanced at the rear view, I half expected to see a second version of me sitting in the back, patient and still. The journal lay on the passenger seat, its last words burning holes through the leather. We are waiting. I should have thrown it out the window. I should have left it smoldering in the fire pit, but I couldn't. Because if I destroyed it, and the silence returned, I'd have no proof, no anchor, and part of me knew that was exactly why they'd written it. By the time I reached Nashville, my nerves were sandpaper. I pulled into a crowded truck stop, wedging myself between two semis, desperate for the noise of humanity. Engines idled, radios spilled out country ballads, drivers laughed, cursed, spat into the gravel. For a few minutes, the noise wrapped around me like armor. Then I noticed it. The pockets. A conversation near me faltered mid-sentence. The radio static warped, thinning like someone turning a dial. One of the idling engines coughed, then cut off entirely. I felt my stomach knot. The silence was creeping in. Not total yet, but spreading. Small circles rippling outward from where I stood. I panicked, slammed the RV into reverse, tires squealing, and barreled out of the lot before anyone could notice the strange gravity collapsing around me. Because if they noticed, if they listened, I knew exactly what would happen. That night, I parked miles down an empty service road buried between pines. The stars shone faint, hazed by city glow. My hands shook as I opened the journal. I didn't write. I couldn't. I just stared at the last page until the words blurred. We are waiting. Waiting for what? It dawned on me slowly like a knife pushed in without malice. They weren't just waiting for me. They were waiting for others, and I was the conduit, the one who carried the silence wherever I went. Every truck stop, every campground, every library, I was the crack in the dam, the fracture through which the void leaked. That realization hollowed me, because what if my resistance wasn't resistance at all? What if every mile I drove, every story I collected, every word I wrote was exactly the spread they wanted? Not surrender, multiplication. I slammed the journal shut, heart pounding. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I considered ending it, not surrendering to them, not joining, but ending me. Taking the RV off the road into a ravine or against a tree, extinguishing the vessel before it spread further. The thought was almost relief. Almost. But then I heard it, a voice, faint, from the dark outside. A child's voice. Don't leave us, mister. My blood froze. I stumbled to the window, pulling the curtain aside, and saw nothing but trees. No figures, no footprints. But the voice came again, softer, coaxing. We'll be alone without you. I pressed my fists against my temples, whispering, not real, not real. But the truth cut deeper. They knew my weakness. Loneliness. They weren't trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to comfort me into surrender. I didn't sleep. I sat all night in the driver's seat, staring through the windshield, lighter clutched tight. My thumb rubbed the wheel until the metal wore smooth. If the silence wanted me to break, I would break on my own terms. By morning, something changed. The forest sounded alive, birds, insects, the rustle of squirrels. My chest ached with relief. I thought maybe my defiance had worked. Maybe the silence had retreated. But when I stepped outside, blinking in the pale light, I saw them. Footprints. Hundreds of them. Encircling the RV in perfect rings, each one barefoot, pressed deep into the mud, all facing inward. My knees buckled. It wasn't retreat. It was patience. They hadn't left. They'd been here all along, watching, waiting. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door, and fell against it, sobbing. The journal slid from the seat to the floor, falling open to a page I hadn't written. New words sprawled across it, neat and deliberate. We do not need to take you. You will bring them to us. I stared until my vision blurred, the words doubling, tripling. They weren't wrong. Every town I passed, every gas station I touched, I left a crack behind. A pocket of silence, a chance for someone else to hear the hum and follow it. That was their plan all along. Not conquest, infection. And me, I was the carrier. The RV felt smaller than ever, the walls pressing close, the air thick. I clawed at my scalp, muttering, "Not me, not me." But even as I said it, the hum rose in my chest. My throat vibrated without permission. The tune spilled out low and steady, filling the rig. And outside, the forest answered. Dozens of voices, hundreds humming in unison. My tune, my curse. I collapsed onto the floor, tears streaming, and realized there was no choice left. I could drive until the tires fell off, scream until my throat tore, burn every page of the journal, and still the silence would ride with me. The only choice left was whether I would keep running, dragging others into the choir's orbit, or stop. But stopping might mean joining them. And that I wasn't ready for. Not yet. I drove until the tank ran dry. Not out of choice, out of inevitability. Somewhere along the Tennessee-Kentucky border, the gauge hit empty, and I coasted into a forgotten pull-off littered with beer cans and old tire treads. The engine coughed, stuttered, then died. Silence rushed in immediately, as if it had been waiting for the machine to give out. For a long while, I just sat there, forehead pressed to the wheel, listening to the ticking of the engine as it cooled. The sound was faint, fragile, the last defiance of metal against the void. When it stopped, the world stilled in a way that felt permanent, like the beginning of the end. I told myself I still had options. I could call for help, I could flag down a car, I could walk to the nearest town, but deep down I knew the truth. Whatever I did, the silence would follow. It wasn't tied to my RV anymore. It was tied to me. I lit the lighter, watching the tiny flame tremble in the stale air. That spark had been my one ritual, my anchor. But now, staring at it, I wondered if it was enough. Could a flicker of fire really hold back something this vast? Or was I just a man clutching a candle in a hurricane? Outside, the forest began to hum, low, steady, countless voices blending into one. My song returned to me 1,000-fold. The ground trembled under my feet as barefoot figures emerged from the trees. Dozens, then hundreds, encircling the RV in perfect rings. Blurred faces, still bodies, all waiting. And then I saw him again, myself. The other Daniel stepped forward, smiling gently, eyes reflecting nothing but stillness. He raised a hand in greeting, as if welcoming me home. "You've done well," he said in my voice. "You carried us farther than you know." My chest tightened. "I never wanted this." He tilted his head. "No one does. But it's not about want. It's about balance. Noise consumes. Silence heals." I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. "Silence destroys. Only the weak noise," he answered softly. "The pointless noise. The lies we tell ourselves. We take that away. What's left is truth." Behind him, the choir swayed gently, humming in unison. The sound vibrated in my bones, pulling at me, begging me to surrender. For a moment, I wanted to. God help me. I wanted to step forward, to let the weight of resistance slip off my shoulders, to dissolve into the stillness. But then I remembered. The couple in Moab, gone without tracks. The man in the cemetery, swallowed by footprints. The baby's cry cut short. They weren't healed, they weren't balanced. They were erased. I gripped the lighter tighter, flame trembling. "I won't join you." The other Daniel smiled sadly. "You already have. Every word you've written, every mile you've driven, every time you opened your mouth, you spread us. You are the bridge, Daniel, whether you like it or not." The truth hit me like a blade. He was right. I was the carrier. Resistance hadn't stopped the spread. It had multiplied it. The silence didn't need me to surrender. It just needed me to keep going. And that's when I understood. The only way to break the chain was to end the carrier. End myself. My hand shook as I held the lighter to the RV's curtains. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the fabric caught, flames racing upward with a roar. The heat slammed into me, hot and alive, the first true noise I'd felt in months. The figures didn't flinch. They stood in their circle, humming louder, drowning out the crackle of fire. My double stepped closer, voice calm even as the flames spread. "Fire won't save you. Silence survives." I backed toward the door, smoke stinging my eyes. "Maybe not," I rasped, "but at least it'll take me with it." The RV groaned as flames devoured it. Plastic melted, glass cracked, smoke poured upward in choking clouds. I stumbled outside, coughing, lighter still clutched in my fist. The figures closed in, but the firelight seemed to blur them, distorting their shapes. The hum wavered just for a second, as if the blaze confused them. My double stood at the edge of the flames, his still eyes locked on mine. "This isn't escape," he said. "It's delay. We will wait. We always wait." And then the fire swallowed him. His face dissolved in the smoke, leaving only heat and ruin behind. I staggered into the woods, lungs burning, ears ringing with the sound of my RV collapsing into itself. The fire raged behind me, lighting the night sky, crackling louder than their hum. For the first time in months, the silence retreated, not gone, but pushed back. I collapsed at the edge of a creek, gasping, staring at my reflection in the black water. My face looked hollow, older, eyes rimmed red. But it was mine, for now. I don't know if the fire truly broke their hold. I don't know if destroying the RV ended the bridge, or if I'm still carrying the silence inside me. Maybe it's already too late. Maybe it's already in you just from hearing this. All I know is this: the dangers of boondocking aren't always rattlesnakes or broken axles or running out of water. Sometimes the danger is silence itself. The kind that strips the world bare. The kind that waits in plain sight, patient as death. And if you ever find yourself parked in a place where the night is too quiet, where even the crickets won't sing, where your own heartbeat feels muffled in your chest, leave. Don't wait for proof. Don't let it circle you, because once it notices you, it never forgets. And silence is always waiting.